Robb Stark stood on the battlements of Riverrun, the cold autumn wind rustling the edges of his cloak. The sky was thick with clouds that pressed low on the horizon, and the waters of the Red Fork glistened in the waning light. A hush lay over the courtyard below, though the men of House Tully had begun their preparations for a wedding that would shape the course of the war. Robb watched them in silence, a somber awareness lingering in his chest. This was not the union he had once planned, but it was the one he now desperately needed. The alliance with House Tyrell had formed quickly, almost miraculously, in the wake of the battles that had shaken the Seven Kingdoms. In the beginning, Robb had barely known Margaery Tyrell beyond courtly descriptions. Her beauty, her poise, the subtle rumor of ambition behind her lovely eyes, but the pressure to marry a daughter of Lord Walder Frey had weighed upon him like a boulder strapped to his shoulders. That old oath, sealed in desperate times, had loomed large, the Frey's discontent growing into a snarling dog that threatened to bite if not appeased. But with the Tyrells breaking with Joffrey Baratheon in King's Landing and forging a new path in the war, the opportunity had arisen. Mace Tyrell offered Margaery's hand in marriage to the king in the north, a bold declaration of fealty to the cause of Stark independence. That single proposition changed everything. Catelyn Stark stood beside her son, her eyes heavy with the burdens of war and motherly worry. She was the one who had brokered the meeting with Lord Tyrell's envoys in secret, aware that House Frey would bristle at being cast aside. She was the one who had reminded Robb that alliances in war needed to be built on stable ground. The Tyrells held the bounty of the Reach, a swath of land that could sustain armies through harsh winters and uncertain times. More than that, they commanded a powerful force that could turn the tide against the Lannisters. If Robb dared to dream of securing the North's independence, or even toppling Joffrey for good, he needed an alliance that stood on more than Walder Frey's prickly sense of honor. Robb closed his eyes, recalling the council he held several months past, where news reached him of Margaery's willingness to forsake the South for an uncertain life beside the Wolf King. She had been promised to King Renly once, and rumors said she had even been considered for marriage to Joffrey. Robb felt a pang of guilt. He had vowed to take a Frey to wife, but every advisor he trusted insisted that wedding a Frey now was too small a prize. The war had grown too large. House Frey was vexing, fractious, a minor ally often balanced on a single thread of bitterness or pride. But House Tyrell was a pillar, and Margaery Tyrell was a path to the kind of power that could save the North from the Lannisters' wrath. In a single council, Robb set aside the old oath, knowing that the repercussions would be dire, but believing that the alternative would be worse. He shivered in the wind as he remembered his arrival back to Riverrun a fortnight ago. There, under the watchful gaze of his uncle Edmure Tully, the negotiations had been sealed with parchment and signet ring. Margaery's party arrived from the south in a great train of gold and green banners, escorted by Tyrell knights in shining armor. The union would take place quickly, for there was no time in war for lengthy celebration or the pageantry of a grand tourney. Everything was tinted with an underlying sense of urgency because the Riverlands still burned with the memory of battles and the Lannisters waited to the west, only barely held back by Robb's victories. Robb opened his eyes to see that the sun was nearly gone. Night fell swiftly in troubled times. He glanced at his mother, whose face bore deep lines of care. She offered a faint smile. "You should rest before the ceremony," she said softly. "The men will light the lanterns soon." He nodded, wordless, and left the battlements to prepare for the wedding. But as he walked the corridors past the battered walls that had witnessed so much grief, he could not help but think on the specter of Walder Frey. The old man's pride would not let this pass without consequence. Robb could almost see his wrinkled face, the watery eyes, the venom behind them. Breaking that vow would not be forgiven, not even for the sake of the Tyrell alliance. Yet what else could he do? The war demanded he seize the Tyrell's strength and harvests. He had learned the price of sentiment when his father lost his head in King's Landing. The cost of trusting the rules of chivalry was too high, a different sort of cunning was required. That evening, Robb donned his finest doublet, dark gray with the dire wolf sigil embroidered in silver thread across his chest. Gray wind paced in the courtyard, unsettled by the stirring of so many strangers. The men lit hundreds of torches that danced against the stone walls, and gentle music drifted across the yard as the bard plucked at strings in an attempt to evoke some fleeting sense of joy. The bride approached, escorted by her own retinue, each wearing the rose of House Tyrell. Margaery Tyrell was graceful as rumor claimed, her brown curls artfully arranged, her gown a shimmering green that caught the firelight with every measured step. But what most struck Robb when he turned to see her approach was not her beauty, though she had plenty of that, but the expression in her eyes. She looked fearless, or at least determined to appear so. Catelyn stood at her son's side, trying to recall the last time Riverrun had hosted any wedding. She wished it were a happy day. She wished there could be dancing and laughter, songs of love instead of war. But she also recognized the necessity. Her heart ached to see how her eldest son's youth had been devoured by conflict. She wondered if Margaery felt the same weight. In that single look the two women shared, a silent pact arose between them. They each had a role, and it went beyond the simple trappings of a wedding vow. They were forging a bond that could decide the fate of kingdoms. Edmure Tully performed the ceremony with the voice of a lord but the gravity of a humble man hoping for peace. Robb gently grasped Margaery's hands as the Septon led them in their vows, words that echoed across the courtyard, words that would tie House Stark and House Tyrell in a single cause. The torches flickered and the wind paused as if the entire night had drawn a breath. Every knight and soldier and retainer stood silent witness. At the culmination, when Robb called Margaery his queen, the crowd erupted in cheers, but beneath that celebration ran a current of apprehension like thunder rumbling beyond the horizon. Afterward, in the great hall, they held a modest feast. Wine flowed freely and the music swelled. Margaery glided among the northern lords, polite and poised, gleaning what she could from them about the hardships they had faced. She smiled at each, an almost magical warmth that made them forget briefly the endless winter storms they had yet to endure. Lady Brienne, who had once served Renly Baratheon, watched from a distance, uncertain how to approach the new queen. She recognized Margaery, but so much had changed since those simpler days. Robb tried to embrace the moment of respite, but each time he looked into Margaery's eyes, he thought of the war. He thought of the men who had died. He thought of the hostility that radiated from the direction of the twins, though Walder Frey was not here to voice his disapproval outright. He could sense it like a choking fog. He exchanged a glance with Roose Bolton, who nodded curtly, expression unreadable as ever. The northern lords were not as openly merry as they might have been had events turned out differently. But still, the threat of the Lannisters was overshadowed this night by the promise in Margaery's presence, by the promise of bread and swords and ships that might tip the scales. For the first time in a long while, Robb allowed himself the faint hope of winning the war and securing a stable future for the North. When the feast ended, the high table was cleared and the newlyweds were led away by well-meaning lords and ladies who showered them with small pleasantries. The wedding bed was an old custom, and though Robb's cheeks grew warm when the chanting reached his ears, he had no illusions about what was expected. Margaery displayed no sign of coyness. She offered him her hand with the same regal bearing that had been on her face throughout the night, and together they ascended to the chamber prepared for them. The door closed behind them on a hush of whispers. In the silence of the chamber, the chill of war melted away just a little. Candlelight flickered on tapestries that depicted scenes of knights and lords long gone. The bed was large but seemed small in the uncertain hush. Margaery's face softened when they were finally alone, and Robb found in her eyes an unexpected mixture of kindness and resolve. He realized then that Margaery Tyrell was no mere pawn sent north like so many had been, but an eager partner in the forging of a new realm. He sensed ambition there, but also intelligence, and perhaps an openness to forging genuine affection. They exchanged few words before their first kiss. He tasted wine on her lips, and for a moment, they might have been any young couple joined in matrimony. But the war sat like a third figure in the room, a silent presence that would not be ignored. When dawn came, they rose to the news that more riders had been spotted near the western road. Heralds from the Lannisters, perhaps, or scouts. The peace of the wedding night gave way at once to the burdens of kingship, and Robb dressed in armor to speak with his commanders. Margaery joined him soon after, wearing her cloak embroidered with the dire wolf of House Stark and the rose of House Tyrell, a symbol of their union. It was a reminder to all who saw her that a new queen stood beside the Wolf King, one who promised the bounty of the Reach. In the weeks that followed, the camp within and around Riverrun buzzed with renewed energy. The Tyrell men aided in distributing supplies. Breads, cheeses, salted meats, and barrels of fruit preserves arrived in wagon loads from Highgarden. The Northerners initially treated these shipments with suspicion. Few were accustomed to such generosity in the midst of war, but Margaery herself supervised the distribution, walking among the soldiers, making sure the wounded had blankets and clean bandages. Her ladies-in-waiting followed her example, learning the names of soldiers and offering kind words. Soon enough, some among the Stark men began calling her the Rose Queen, half admiring, half bemused by the presence of so courtly a figure in the midst of the Riverlands' ruin. Yet not everyone welcomed the match. Far to the north, in the Twins, Walder Frey all but frothed at the mouth when the news reached him of Robb's marriage. Messengers brought word that Frey outriders had cut ties with the Stark outriders. Angry letters arrived, full of Walder's venom, unheeded threats disguised in courteous language. Robb let each letter pass through his hands with a frown. Catelyn pleaded with him to at least respond, to attempt some form of appeasement, but the lines had already been drawn. The king in the north had broken his oath. Walder Frey's vengeance would not be so easily swayed. Despite the looming threats, Margaery demonstrated a keen sense for diplomacy. She wrote a carefully worded letter to the twins, addressing the old lord as cousin of my new house, though the Freys and Tyrells shared no real kinship. She invited him, in polite phrases, to attend a second ceremony in the north once the war was won, a victory celebration to mend old wounds. It was a graceful move, hinting that Walder Frey's presence would still be acknowledged. Robb watched her pen the letter, impressed by the tact she displayed. But in his heart, he knew Walder Frey would not be satisfied. Still, he admired Margaery's attempts to mitigate the enmity that threatened to grow into a dagger pointed at their backs. Meanwhile, word spread among the northern bannermen that House Tyrell was not only sending food and supplies but also forging arms and armor in secret. Margaery had convinced her father to spare blacksmiths from the Reach, and wagons of iron had begun rumbling north. Before long, Robb's army was bolstered by newly forged swords and spears, polished shields bearing the dire wolf alongside the rose. This infusion of steel emboldened the men, and with the Riverlords' combined forces, they set about reclaiming scattered villages still under Lannister occupation. The Tyrell cavalry, skilled horsemen accustomed to open fields, learned to navigate the muddy roads and streams of the Riverlands, a testament to their commitment. Beyond these practical matters, Margaery's arrival heralded a subtle shift in the morale of Robb's supporters. The gloom that followed them from battle to battle seemed to lift, if only a little. Men spoke of the new queen as a symbol of prosperity, a sign that if the North could secure ties with a powerful southern house, perhaps the entire realm might be reshaped. The bards sang quiet songs in the evening. A rose in the snow, they called her, a southern flower planted in the chilling wind. Some of the older lords scoffed at such sentiments, but the younger knights, the squires, the footmen with hearts hungry for hope, they found in those words an echo of the dream that had fueled Robb's rebellion in the first place, a realm free of tyranny, of Lannister treachery, of the crippling shackles that had cost Ned Stark his head. Days turned to weeks, and the new alliance was tested. Tywin Lannister, far from idle, began to probe the Riverlands with greater force, sending columns of men to harry the outskirts of Robb's territory. Skirmishes broke out, swift and bloody, with the Lannisters often retreating into the west before Robb could muster a decisive counterattack. These stinging raids kept the Northmen on edge, never able to rest. Margaery conferred often with Robb, offering suggestions gleaned from her father's counsel. She was not a battle commander, but she knew how to read the shifting alliances at King's Landing, how to interpret the fractured lines of loyalty among the lords who had once sworn to Joffrey. Her counsel proved invaluable in anticipating which houses might send reinforcements or funds to the Lannisters and which might be swayed to the Stark cause. One evening, as the harvest moon rose over Riverrun, Robb summoned Margaery, Catelyn, and his key bannermen to the Great Hall. The war required bold action. Standing before the fire, his hair glinting copper in the flickering light, Robb traced a map spread over a wooden table. His scarred hands indicated the rough path the Lannisters had been taking when they harassed the Tully lands. Roose Bolton stood to one side, silent, his pale eyes flicking over every mark. Great Jon Umber hovered behind them, arms crossed, bristling with impatience. Edmure Tully and Brynden the Blackfish listened in thoughtful silence. "We can't keep letting Tywin strike at our flanks," Robb said, voice low but insistent. "If we wait, he'll whittle away our forces. We need to draw him into a decisive battle, somewhere he cannot retreat without cost." Margaery leaned closer to the map. "He favors his supply lines," she said. "If we threaten them, we might force him to stand and fight." Robb glanced at her, considering. He knew Tywin well enough to see reason in that suggestion. Tywin was methodical, ruthless. He would protect his resources vigorously, for a starving army could never hope to maintain its advantage. Catelyn's gaze flicked between her son and the new queen. What of the other Lannisters? Ser Jaime is still our prisoner, but I fear for Sansa in King's Landing. Even more so for Arya, if she's out there somewhere. She paused, forcing calm into her voice. We need to be mindful of hostages. Robb's shoulders tensed. I haven't forgotten Sansa, nor have I forgotten Arya. He took a deep breath. But freeing them might require a different tactic, perhaps an exchange. If we could capture Cersei or another high-profile member of their house, we might force a trade. For now, I want to make sure Tywin is on the defensive. Lady Margaery nodded thoughtfully. My father's men reported that the Lannisters have been forced to strip their granaries in the Westerlands to supply the war effort. If those lines were cut. She traced a gentle finger along the route that led from Lannisport to the front lines. Tywin would be compelled to protect his supply trains. They debated well into the night, forging a plan that combined the northern knack for ambush with the Tyrell cavalry's ability to dominate open stretches. The talk was sober, measured, without the brash enthusiasm of some war councils. Every lord there had lost men. No one was eager for more blood, but war demanded action. When the meeting ended, Robb lingered by the map, reluctant to rest. His hand brushed the carved wooden pieces representing armies, as though trying to divine a path forward. Margaery stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his arm. He met her gaze, and for a moment, the burdens of kingship receded, replaced by a flicker of warmth between them. He marveled at how easily she carried herself among soldiers and warlords, how keenly she listened. She was a queen of a different sort than any he had known, part courtly lady, part cunning stateswoman. You will need rest for tomorrow, she said softly, her voice carrying the barest lilt of Highgarden. We all will. He nodded, exhaling a quiet breath. The men had already begun leaving the hall, jokes and murmured conversations trailing behind them. The next day saw the beginning of Robb's new campaign. He dispatched a contingent under Roose Bolton eastward, feigning an attempt to circle around Harrenhal, which still bristled with Lannister troops. Meanwhile, Robb led a larger force west, accompanied by Margaery's brother, Ser Loras Tyrell, who arrived with a fresh contingent of knights. The plan was to lure Tywin away from his comfortable vantage and force him into an engagement on ground chosen by the north. In the crisp morning light, banners flapped in the wind, the dire wolf, the rose, the flayed man, the trout, all symbols of houses bound together in uneasy alliance. Robb took the vanguard, gray wind at his side. The men marched with renewed purpose, hearts steeled by the possibility that this might prove the turning point of the war. Margaery remained at Riverrun to oversee supply lines. It was a decision reached after much debate, for she wished to accompany Robb, but he insisted that commanding the distribution of food and reinforcements was no minor task. More than that, he worried for her safety. While she had proven herself far from meek, the battlefront was no place for the queen to risk her life. She acquiesced, though not without a determined set to her jaw. She promised him that if the fighting came close, she would do her duty to protect the men's morale and keep watch for the seeds of betrayal that might sprout in their midst. Robb wrote letters to her often as his army marched through the Riverlands toward the edges of the Westerlands. His early dispatches carried hope, small victories in skirmishes, towns liberated, enemy scouts scattered. Ser Loras's cavalry excelled in open terrain, slicing through lightly defended outposts. Robb reported that their combined forces seemed unstoppable, the men proclaiming, "We ride for the Rose and the Wolf." But as the campaign pressed further west, Tywin Lannister responded with heavier columns, forcing Robb into a series of grueling engagements that left both sides bleeding. All the while, Walder Frey's shadow loomed. Rumors circulated of Frey riders disappearing into the night near supply lines, of allied villages receiving no provisions. Some whispered that Walder Frey might ally himself with Tywin. Others said he would never bow to Lannisters but might wait for the war to end in stalemate, then exploit the weakness of both sides. Margaery spent hours in consultation with Catelyn and Edmure, trying to guess the old man's next move. She wrote again, reminding Lord Frey that House Tyrell had extended an olive branch, but the silence that followed was damning. Finally, word reached Riverrun that Tywin had taken the bait, preparing to strike at Robb's host with his main force. The next missive from Robb arrived by Raven just days later, urging Margaery and the lords at Riverrun to send all possible reinforcements, including the troops that had remained behind to guard the newly arrived Tyrell supplies. The battle would be in the plains near Oxgross, an open field with few places to hide. The letter brimmed with confidence that they could catch Tywin off guard. Margaery read Robb's words twice, hands trembling with both excitement and dread. Then she swiftly organized the reinforcements. That same evening, as the men formed up outside Riverrun's gates, Margaery stood on the ramparts. She wore a thick fur mantle over her gown to keep out the crisp chill of night. Below, torches dotted the courtyard, and the clank of armor and the stamping of hooves filled the air. With them marched her father's bannermen, the lesser houses of the Reach who had pledged their steel. Her heart pounded at the enormity of what was to come. She realized then that she was caught in the throes of a war far greater than any she had dreamed of when first betrothed to Renly Baratheon. Yet she did not flinch from it. She had chosen her path when she agreed to wed Robb Stark. She stood tall, giving each knight who passed a brief smile or nod, determined to embody the hope that gave them strength. Lady Catelyn joined her, silently observing the departure. She touched Margaery's arm gently. No words were needed, they both understood. With one final push, House Stark and House Tyrell would either secure a crushing victory over the Lannisters or risk losing everything. Margaery wondered if Walder Frey watched from afar, smugly waiting for them to falter. She pushed the thought aside. If he was waiting to strike, so be it. Let him come. For now, the war demanded all her focus. Riverrun seemed emptier the next day. The fortress's main courtyard was nearly deserted, save for Catelyn's retainers, some Tully guardsmen, and the support staff needed to maintain the keep. Margaery spent the time checking ration lists, ensuring that the soldiers on the march had enough to eat. She personally oversaw the dispatch of fresh bandages and medical supplies to the battlefield. She also found moments to wander the castle's walls, absorbing the Riverland's deep, quiet sorrow. Here, Ned Stark had courted Catelyn Tully so many years ago. Here, the tides of war had turned countless times. Now, it fell to her, Margaery Tyrell, to keep the peace behind the lines while the king in the north led the charge. Days stretched on and no news arrived from the west. Anxiety mounted. Often Margaery took refuge in the Godwood, kneeling by the ancient weirwood, though she did not share the faith of the old gods. There, with the scarlet leaves murmuring overhead, she found solace, praying in her own way for Robb's safety. She closed her eyes, recalling his fierce determination, his capacity for mercy, the gentleness he displayed behind the closed doors of their marriage bed. She prayed that the fates would spare him the ruin that had claimed so many. At last, a rider appeared on the horizon one pale afternoon, galloping toward Riverrun with a banner of the dire wolf and the rose. Margaery rushed to meet him in the courtyard, heart pounding so loudly she thought it might burst. The rider dismounted, breathless, face streaked with dirt and sweat. "My lady," he panted, kneeling before her. "A great victory at Oxgross. King Robb and Ser Loras have forced Tywin to retreat." Cheers erupted from the guards, relief flooding them like a wave. Margaery felt her knees threaten to buckle, a trembling hand rising to cover her mouth. They had done it. For a moment, she could not speak. Then she found her voice. "Tell me, is the king well?" she asked, quiet urgency thick in her tone. "Yes, my lady. He was uninjured. They say the Wolf King fought like a whirlwind. Tywin barely escaped with his life." Tears pricked her eyes. She thanked the man and ordered that he be given food, wine, and fresh clothing. The news spread quickly through Riverrun, banishing the pall of uncertainty that had hung over them. 1,000 small celebrations blossomed in the corridors and halls. Serving folk cheered the name Robb Stark, toasting him and cursing Tywin Lannister. Margaery returned to her chambers, her heart full of relief and gratitude. She stared at her reflection in the looking glass, hardly recognizing herself. She was queen of a victorious king in the north, having helped secure a major triumph against the Lannisters. Yet she could not forget that the war was far from over and Walder Frey's vengeance still simmered. In the days that followed, more riders came with details of the battle. Robb had employed cunning tactics, feigning an attack from one flank while sending his swiftest riders to encircle Tywin's main lines. The Tyrell Knights, led by Ser Loras, shattered the Lannister cavalry. Tywin managed a retreat, but left behind wagons and many wounded. The victory was decisive enough to crack the aura of invincibility around Tywin's leadership. It was said that some Western lords, weary of the Lannisters' constant demands, had begun to consider neutrality, or even backing the Wolf King. Margaery's admiration for Robb deepened upon reading these reports. She understood better why men called him the young wolf, not just for his age, but for his ferocity in battle, tempered by a cool-headed strategy. She wrote him a letter filled with praise and affection, though she stopped short of mentioning Walder Frey's threats. She felt that this was not the time to burden him with yet another worry. He had enough to contend with on the battlefield. However, Walder Frey was not idle. Ravens arrived from the north, bearing troubling tidings that Frey men were making alliances in secret with lesser houses. They were rumored to be plotting sabotage or at least withholding their support. Some northern lords shrugged it off, claiming the north needed no Frey loyalty. Others worried that Walder Frey's strategic position on the Green Fork gave him leverage. Margaery recognized a deeper danger: the Freys might undermine Robb's campaign at a critical juncture. Still, no open attack came. Walder Frey's vengeance festered like a wound that refused to heal, but it had yet to burst. The news of Robb's next move arrived shortly afterward. Following the victory at Oxcross, he pressed into the Westerlands, capturing a key fortress. The tide of war seemed to have turned. Margaery oversaw the dispatch of more supplies, determined not to let Tywin's men reclaim lost ground. She also took note of the approach of winter, an early bite in the wind, the soft hush of the nights. If the conflict dragged on, food would be scarce and the advantage would swing to the side that could best endure the cold. House Tyrell's farmland would be crucial. After a few more hard-won skirmishes, Robb arrived triumphant at Riverrun, leading his men with the banners flying high. Margaery waited in the courtyard, clad in a simple yet elegant gown. Catelyn and Edmure stood beside her, along with a crowd of cheering folk. When Robb dismounted, she saw lines of fatigue etched into his face, but his eyes were alight with that fierce, determined fire. She rushed to him and he embraced her without hesitation, heedless of the onlookers. The onlookers erupted in applause, a shared moment of unity in a war-torn world. That night, a feast was held in the Great Hall, the mood jubilant. Roasted meats, fresh bread, honey-glazed vegetables courtesy of the Reach's stores, all were laid out in abundance. Wine poured freely, and the hall reverberated with the laughter of men who had faced death and returned victorious. Seated on Robb's right, Margaery watched him speak with his lords, praising their valor, inviting them to celebrate. She smiled, remembering how formal he had seemed upon their first meeting. Now there was warmth in his eyes when he glanced at her, a sense of trust that hadn't existed before. They had become partners in truth, bonded by more than vows. When the feasting slowed, and the more boisterous nights turned to songs and dice, Margaery and Robb walked side by side to the castle walls. The moon bathed the courtyard in silver. The night was quiet except for the distant hum of revelry. They paused by the battlements, looking out over the dark waters of the river. He took her hand, and she felt the rough calluses of his palm. "You have led us to victory, my king," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "The realm will talk of Oxcross for years to come." He shook his head slightly. "It was our victory. The Tyrell cavalry, your supplies, your counsel. I would not have succeeded without them." A small smile curved his lips. "I'm not so foolish as to think I win alone." She studied him, noticing the guarded tension beneath his gratitude. The war had hardened him, but not destroyed his compassion. It was that balance that drew her to him. "What will we do next?" He sighed. "We hold, consolidate our gains, keep the Lannisters on the defensive. They still outnumber us in some respects, and they have King's Landing's gold to pay for Sellswords if they choose." "And Walder Frey?" she asked gently. His expression grew grim. "He's a festering threat. My mother told me of his recent letters, the demands, the curses. I made a choice and I must stand by it. I can't go crawling back to the twins, promising him half the realm. Nor would I if I could. But ignoring him may invite him to do something rash." She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Is there any chance he might be placated?" Robb's jaw tightened. "We've tried. I can't offer him a second vow of marriage. And I doubt anything short of that would soothe his anger. For now, we watch." She nodded, stepping closer to rest her head against his shoulder. They stayed there for a time, silent, each lost in thoughts of battles won and battles yet to come. When dawn broke, messengers arrived bearing news from King's Landing. King Joffrey was rattled by the defeat in the Westerlands, blaming his generals, demanding Tywin's presence. Tension rose in the capital, with the small folk growing restless under heavy taxes. Whispers spoke of the Tyrell betrayal. The Tyrell girl weds the Wolf King, spreading through the streets. Some cheered at Joffrey's misfortune, remembering the humiliations inflicted by his reign. Others condemned Margaery as a traitor to the Iron Throne. But none could deny that the war's momentum had shifted. In the afterglow of victory, Robb organized a war council to plan a bold strike. With winter's approach, he aimed to force a conclusion before the snows made campaigning impossible. Suggestions abounded. Some urged an assault on King's Landing itself, though the city's defenses were formidable. Others recommended entrenching their position in the Riverlands, letting the Lannisters starve or lose morale. Ultimately, the council decided to test the Crownland's outer defenses, measuring the realm's response. If Joffrey's hold was weak enough, a push on King's Landing might be feasible, especially if the city's population rose against the tyrant. In the midst of these discussions, Margaery listened quietly, offering her insights into southern politics. She knew that the Tyrell name still carried weight among many lords. Even those who had not officially declared for Robb might be swayed if victory seemed inevitable. She suggested sending envoys south, appealing to houses long unhappy with the Lannisters' grip. Robb embraced the idea and dispatched riders with the Rose and the Wolf on their banners. Even so, cracks appeared in the alliance. Roose Bolton remained characteristically aloof, his calm gaze betraying little of his true intentions. The Grey John, while loyal, grew restless for more direct confrontation. And other lords muttered about the presence of too many southern knights in their midst. Subtle tensions simmered, and Margaery felt them acutely. She had to balance the southern courtesy she'd been raised with and the blunt honesty the northerners preferred. Each day was an exercise in carefully maintained unity. The next few weeks saw the forging of a plan. Robb would march south with his main host, accompanied by Margaery's brother Loras and a strong Tyrell contingent. They would engage the Crownland forces, drawing out whatever loyalist lords still answered to Joffrey. Meanwhile, smaller Stark forces would maintain their hold on the Riverlands, ensuring Tywin could not slip around to threaten their rear. Catelyn would remain in Riverrun, overseeing diplomacy and supply, joined by Margaery at times. But Margaery convinced Robb she should travel with him at least for part of the campaign, using her presence to rally any Reach men who had not fully committed. It was a radical decision. Queens rarely rode to war, yet Robb recognized the strategic value. When Margaery made speeches or greeted men in the Tyrell camps, their loyalty solidified. She displayed a flair for inspiring hope, reminding them that this war was not only for the North's independence but for ending Lannister tyranny throughout the realm. Some knights fell over themselves to swear oaths of devotion, enthralled by the living embodiment of a Rose Queen at the Wolf King's side. They began their march south. A new tension electrified the ranks. The roads were rough, lined with the wreckage of earlier battles. They passed burned-out farms, villages half collapsed, their small folk scattered. At each ruin, Robb's jaw set harder, and Margaery watched the sorrow flicker in his eyes. She urged her ladies to do what they could: offer coin, distribute food, but there was no time to rebuild these places. The war churned inexorably on. Then came the first engagement near a crossroads close to Rosby. Scouts warned that the Crown's forces, led by a minor lord loyal to King Joffrey, were waiting with a few thousand men. Robb saw an opportunity to send a message, and he moved decisively. The battle was swift and one-sided. The northern infantry pinned the loyalists in place, while Loras led a flanking maneuver with Tyrell cavalry that shattered their lines. Hundreds surrendered. Margaery watched from a vantage, heart pounding. The thunder of hooves and the clash of steel rang across the field. By the time the dust settled, the Rose and Wolf banners stood triumphant once more. Yet victory carried its own grim weight. Blood soaked the ground, and the moans of the wounded filled the air. Margaery did not retreat to her tent. She walked among the wounded on both sides, comforting them, offering water. Some of the northern lords frowned at her compassion for enemy soldiers, but she believed that forging a new realm meant showing mercy where it could be shown. Robb, at the conclusion of the battle, accepted the captives' pledges of fealty. Some genuine, some forced. He spared their lives, hoping to sow dissent within King's Landing's ranks. But he also knew mercy was a weapon that could backfire if the freed men returned to fight again. Days later, they advanced closer to the city. Spies reported that King Joffrey was livid, demanding the heads of traitors, sacking the incompetent lords who failed him. The city quaked with fear and tension. Tywin was said to have returned to King's Landing, stoking the fires of defense. Robb's men scouted the roads carefully, capturing or driving off any loyalist outriders. One night, in the hush of the war camp, Margaery found Robb in his tent, poring over a map by lamplight. She entered quietly, the rustle of canvas hardly audible against the distant murmurs of the troops. He looked up, exhaustion carved into his features. She approached, placing her hands on his shoulders, feeling the tension tight as iron in his muscles. "You need sleep," she whispered. He managed a weary smile. "Soon. I'm going over the scouts' reports." She glanced at the parchment. "Our enemies gather like crows around a carcass. They know we approach." Robb nodded. "They'll try to bolster the city's defenses. They'll man every gate. If we attempt a siege, they might hold out for months, especially if the Red Keep is fully stocked. Our advantage is the unrest among the small folk. If they riot, if they let us in." She finished the thought. "We might take the city without a long siege, but that depends on many factors. Hunger, dissatisfaction with Joffrey, fear of Lannister cruelty." His voice dropped to a grave murmur. "It also depends on Walder Frey staying out of our way. If he chooses this moment to strike at our rear, we'll be pinned." She felt the old dread coil in her stomach. "We've heard little from him recently. That could mean he's planning something." Robb stood, turning to draw her into an embrace. "Whatever comes, we face it together." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She wanted to cling to that moment of calm, to imagine a world where the wars were over and they could focus on rebuilding. But the flicker of the lamp cast shadows on the tent walls, each shape a reminder of the looming conflict. Within a few days, their scouts reported a large Lannister force marching out from the city, thousands arrayed under the gold lion banner, accompanied by King's Landing foot soldiers wearing the royal stag and lion sigil. It seemed Joffrey had sent an army to challenge Robb before he reached the gates. The confrontation, if it came, would be huge, perhaps the largest single engagement since the war began. Robb's men braced themselves, the Tyrell knights polished their armor, and Margaery prepared to wait once again at a secure vantage. Yet as the armies prepared to clash, a sudden shift of the wind brought cold rain and dark clouds. The battlefield turned to mud. Days of skirmishing followed, each side probing for weaknesses, each uncertain whether to commit to a full-scale attack in the boggy conditions. During this stalemate, a messenger arrived from the north, dust-caked and frantic. He demanded to speak with King Robb at once. The news he carried shattered the fragile sense of momentum. Walder Frey had crossed the twin bridges with a large host. He was marching south, accompanied by some minor river lords who had grown wary of House Stark's growing power and resentful of House Tyrell's presence. They were heading straight toward the vulnerable supply lines that connected Robb's main host to Riverrun. If they succeeded in cutting off those lines, Robb and his men would be trapped between the Lannisters and Freys, outnumbered and without supplies. When Robb emerged from the command tent to relay the news to his most trusted advisors, the camp fell silent with dread. Margaery felt her pulse thunder in her ears. This was the vengeance of Walder Frey, timed to perfection. The old man had waited until Robb was fully committed to the southern advance. The grin of the twins might have been 1,000 miles away, but it felt as though Walder himself stood mocking them. The War Council convened that evening in Robb's tent, rain still pattering on canvas overhead. Great John Umber paced like a caged beast, shouting that they should turn and crush Walder Frey once and for all. Roose Bolton, more reserved, suggested a strategic retreat. Catelyn insisted they could not abandon the push on King's Landing altogether. It would undo months of work. Ser Loras Tyrell looked torn, uncertain whether to push forward or handle the threat behind. Margaery sensed the precariousness of the moment. For all Robb's successes in open battle, this was a political and strategic dilemma. One misstep and the entire campaign could collapse. At the head of the table, Robb listened intently, his expression thunderous but controlled. He acknowledged each perspective. The camp crackled with tension. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm and measured. "We cannot press on to King's Landing if our rear is in danger of being cut off," he said. "If Walder Frey takes Riverrun, we lose everything. Supplies, a stronghold, the Tully Alliance gone. We must protect Riverrun." The Great John slammed a fist on the table. "I crush the Freys and be done with it. But Catelyn shook her head. We cannot abandon the Riverlords who remain loyal if the Lannisters gather behind us. They'll surge forward, retake ground we've fought so hard for. Robb's gaze flicked to Margaery. He understood the precarious nature of the Tyrell alliance, too. If they gave up on the push south, would her father's bannermen remain committed? Or would they question the worth of a king who retreated? Margaery spoke quietly, choosing her words with care. We need to contain Walder Frey's threat swiftly. If you can catch him away from the twins, it might force his men to break. They rely on that fortress for their security. Ser Loras nodded. Let me take a contingent of knights. We'll meet him in battle, while you hold your ground here against the Lannisters. Roose Bolton cleared his throat. Dividing our forces is risky. The Lannisters might sense weakness. A deep silence fell. Margaery could almost see the wheels turning in Robb's head. Sacrificing the campaign south would be devastating. But ignoring Walder Frey would be suicidal. The war demanded a painful choice. Then we do this, Robb said slowly. Roose, you take part of our host, enough to meet the Freys on equal footing. Ser Loras, you will accompany him with your knights. March north with haste. If the gods grant us fortune, you'll drive Walder Frey back to the twins. If they entrench, lay siege. But do not get bogged down. Meanwhile, I will stay here with the rest of our forces, preventing the Lannisters from advancing. We hold them in check as best we can. Once you've secured Riverrun, rejoin us with fresh supplies. No one cheered, for the plan was fraught with danger. Nonetheless, it offered a glimmer of hope, a chance to avoid losing everything at once. They laid out the details, discussing supply routes, messenger signals, fallback positions. By the time the council ended, the mood in camp was grim but resolute. War demanded hard decisions. At dawn, Roose Bolton and Ser Loras rode north with a formidable force. Margaery watched them depart, her stomach knotted with worry. If they failed, Walder Frey might break their alliance's backbone. If they succeeded, the path to King's Landing might still be open. Robb stayed behind, as planned, ready to confront any Lannister offensive. The days that followed were a tense game of maneuvering under the endless drizzle, each side waiting for the other to commit to a major engagement. Amid that tension, Margaery and Robb found small moments of closeness. The awareness of danger hung over every gesture, every whispered conversation. She would visit his tent in the evenings, sharing a modest meal, sometimes reviewing the day's developments, sometimes lapsing into silence, just grateful for each other's presence. The flickering lantern light cast their shadows on the canvas, weaving them together. Weeks passed and the ground dried under the weak autumn sun. Still no word arrived from the north. Robb's men murmured that the Freys must have put up a stiff fight. The Lannisters, too, seemed content to wait. Then, one fateful morning, horns sounded at dawn. Scouts brought word that the Lannister army was marching in full force, war horns echoing across the fields. Robb's men scrambled into position, forming ranks, aligning cavalry. The final confrontation appeared at hand. Margaery stood on a small rise overlooking the plain. She donned a cuirass over her gown, a token measure of protection. Her heart hammered in her chest, adrenaline surging. The Wolf King's command tent came down, the banners were raised, and the entire camp shifted into battle readiness. War cries rose into the chilly air. Robb led the northern infantry while the Greatjon led another flank. The Tyrell foemen formed up behind them, discipline evident in their ranks. The Lannisters approached from the south in a vast golden tide. Trumpets blared. Bright steel caught the sun. At their head, a standard bearing the lion and stag soared high. Even at a distance, Margaery recognized the scale of the force. The city had emptied its garrison, or so it seemed. Thousands upon thousands, a swirling sea of shields and spears. Somewhere in that mass was Tywin, or perhaps the King's Guard. This was the House of Lannister's final play. If they could crush the Wolf King here, King's Landing would be safe from siege. The clangor of steel began as the armies closed, a deafening roar. Arrows arced overhead, darkening the sky. Horses screamed, men shouted. Margaery's breath caught as she saw Robb at the forefront, swinging his sword with deadly grace, gray wind loping beside him. She wanted to tear her gaze away, but she could not. Each second stretched like an eternity. The melee churned back and forth. Dust and smoke mingled, obscuring the battlefield. The lines of men shifted in a slow, grinding dance of death. In that chaos, Margaery realized the Lannisters held the advantage in sheer numbers. Bit by bit, the Wolf King's lines risked being enveloped. Knights on both sides galloped into the fray, lances splintering. The Tyrell foot stood firm at first, but they began to bend under the relentless pressure. Margaery's heart pounded. She could see archers on the Lannister right flank moving to rain arrows into the northern rear. Then, a distant thunder of hooves. The ground trembled. From the far right of the battlefield came a host bearing the rose and the flayed man banners. Roose Bolton and Ser Loras had arrived after all. The Freys had been contained or at least momentarily bypassed, and they had returned in time. The Watchers on the rise erupted in startled cheers. The newly arrived cavalry slammed into the unprotected Lannister flank, scattering archers and sowing terror. The advantage shifted in a heartbeat. Margaery saw Robb rally his men with renewed vigor. The line steadied, then began to push forward. An enormous shout rose from the combined ranks of the North and the Reach. The Lannister columns, caught between hammer and anvil, wavered. The Wolf King led a charge that split the enemy ranks. A swirl of steel and banners ensued. It was a vision of swirling dust, screams, and battered shields. The combined cavalry of Ser Loras and the Great John crashed into the heart of the Lannister line, ripping it apart. The rout came swiftly. Chunks of the Lannister force turned to flee toward King's Landing, only to be cut down by pursuing riders. Others surrendered en masse. As the Golden Tide collapsed, the battlefield fell into an eerie hush. Bodies littered the trampled plain. The wounded cried out for mercy. Smoke curled where small fires had erupted. Over it all flew the dire wolf and rose banners, triumphant. Margaery mounted her horse and rode cautiously forward, escorted by guards. She found Robb near the center, his armor spattered with mud and blood. Grey Wind was at his side, panting, muzzle stained crimson. Robb saw her and smiled, relief mixing with exhaustion. His men parted to allow her through. She dismounted, heart racing. They stood face to face in the aftermath of their greatest victory yet. "We've broken them," he said, voice hoarse. "The Lannisters are in full retreat." She stepped closer, resting a hand gently on his cheek. "You've done it, my king. The realm will never forget this day." He closed his eyes briefly, leaning into her touch. "We've done it. You, the Tyrells, the North, all of us." Then he glanced around, expression sobering. "So many dead, though." She nodded, swallowing back tears. There was no cheering in her heart for the fallen. War's toll was always brutal. But if this victory brought an end closer, if it meant fewer would die in the future, then perhaps the cost might be justified. She wondered what King's Landing would do now. Would they bar the gates and try to hold out? Or would Joffrey cower behind his walls, waiting to be unseated? By nightfall, the battlefield had been combed for survivors. Robb's men set up camp once more, triumphant but weary. A hush of fatigue settled over them. Fires flickered across the plain as healers moved among the wounded. Margaery helped where she could, binding wounds and offering water, her queenly gown stained with the grime of war. No one questioned her presence now. She belonged there, as vital to the morale of the troops as any banner or battle speech. When the dark of night fully fell, she and Robb sat together in a makeshift command tent. A small candle illuminated their faces. The voices outside were subdued. Robb's eyes were heavy, the lines of worry and exhaustion carved deep. "You should rest," she told him gently. He exhaled. "I will. But first, I need to plan the next move. King's Landing is vulnerable now. We might force their surrender if we approach quickly before Tywin can regroup. Your men need time to recover," she cautioned. He nodded slowly. "A few days at least. Then, we march on the capital. If Joffrey won't yield, we will take it by storm. And this war may finally end." Her gaze drifted to the tent wall where shadows flickered. She thought of the small folk in King's Landing, of Sansa Stark, of everyone else trapped under Joffrey's madness. The end might be near, but at what cost? Still, they had come too far to turn back. Robb reached for her hand. "I never asked if you regret your choice, to marry me, to break from your family's old loyalties." She looked at him earnestly. "No, our houses were never truly loyal to the Lannisters. It was convenience, politics. This is something more. I believe in you and what you fight for." He squeezed her hand gently, then rose. "Then let us finish what we started. We'll build a realm that can look beyond the old hatreds. A realm where the North stands free, or at least safe, and the Reach prospers without the yoke of tyranny. She stood and embraced him, ignoring the bloodstains on his torn surcoat. For a time, the war receded, leaving only the quiet unity of two souls who had chosen to meet the chaos of the world together. The candle fluttered in the night air, and outside the tent, the Northmen and Tyrells mingled around campfires, forging bonds amid the ruin. They had survived another day, another battle. The path ahead might be darker still, but at least they would tread it as one. A few days later, as the battered host began its advance on King's Landing, rumors ran ahead of them. Reports said that chaos reigned in the city. Joffrey raged in the Red Keep, ordering arrests, threatening lords who dared question him. Starvation loomed, for supply routes from the Reach were cut off. The gold cloaks might buckle under the pressure. Even Cersei Lannister, so rumor claimed, was losing her grip. From the vantage of the advancing army, it seemed the city was ripe for the taking if only another blow were delivered. Yet the blow would not come without cost. The Lannisters, for all their losses, were still formidable. Thousands manned the walls. Trebuchets and scorpions peered over the battlements, ready to hurl flaming pitch or giant bolts. A direct assault would be bloody. The siege might drag on, but if they managed to incite a riot within the city, or if some lords threw open the gates. In late autumn's chill, the Wolf King and his queen arrived within sight of King's Landing, the spires of the Red Keep barely visible in the distance. Their banners fluttered in the cold wind. The men set up an encampment, constructing wooden palisades. The final act was at hand. Inside their spacious command tent, Robb and Margaery huddled over a map alongside the Great John, Roose Bolton, Ser Loras, and other key leaders. They discussed infiltration, sabotage, diplomatic overtures. Margaery recommended that they send a message into the city, promising leniency to any who would lay down arms and acknowledge the king in the north as the rightful liberator. Robb agreed, hoping to save lives and sow discord among Joffrey's supporters. The next few days saw ravens fly into King's Landing with offers of mercy. Some returned with cryptic replies, others never came back. The city's gates remained closed. Nights brought the glow of torches along the massive walls, the silhouettes of watchmen. Tension hung in the air, thick as the dawn fog that rolled off the Blackwater rush. And still, Walder Frey lingered in the north, mostly repelled but far from defeated. Word came that Roose Bolton had forced him back to the Twins, but not decisively. The old man hunkered behind his fortress, perhaps waiting for the result of the southern campaign. This precarious balance might shatter at any moment. But for now, the Wolf King had his chance to seize the heart of the realm. Just as the final preparations for an assault were underway, a solitary rider approached Robb's lines under a flag of truce. He wore the colors of House Lannister. Cautious, the guards brought him to Robb and Margaery. There, in a small clearing outside the command tent, the man knelt and presented a sealed letter. Robb opened it, scanning the contents with a guarded expression. Margaery waited, heart fluttering. His eyes flicked across the lines, and at last, he looked up. "King Joffrey proposes a parley," he said, voice cool. "He invites us, to the city gates." The lords around him exchanged wary glances. A trap was likely. Joffrey's cruelty was well known. But a parley could also be an opportunity. If the city's defenders saw their king meet with Robb Stark in person, it might embolden those who doubted Joffrey's rule. Margaery spoke carefully. "We should accept, but we must be cautious. Bring enough men to protect us." So it was decided. The next morning, Robb donned his armor once more, Margaery at his side, accompanied by a carefully chosen guard, the Great John, Ser Loras, a dozen seasoned knights, archers ready at a distance. They rode toward the city gates, passing lines of watchers from both armies. The crowd murmured, but no arrows flew. The watchers on the walls peered down, crossbows at the ready. When they reached the towering gates, they found Joffrey Baratheon waiting on the ramparts, flanked by members of the king's guard. His features were twisted in an arrogant sneer. Beside him stood Cersei, pale but composed, and behind them loomed the stoic figure of Tywin Lannister. A small platform had been erected just outside arrow range. Robb dismounted and waited, Margaery dismounting gracefully beside him. Tension weighed heavily in the cold morning air. A herald announced them. Then Joffrey stepped forward, his voice high and shrill. "You come before the rightful king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men," he began, rattling off titles. Robb stood in silence until Joffrey finished. Then he spoke. "You know who I am. I am the king in the north, Robb Stark. We need not bandy words. You proposed a parley. What is your offer?" Joffrey bristled. "My offer, traitor? That you lay down your arms at once, release Jaime Lannister, and swear fealty to the Iron Throne. In return, I grant you the North as your seat of governance." As for your whore from Highgarden, his eyes flicked contemptuously at Margaery. She'll face judgment for treason. A growl rose from the assembled Northmen. Margaery felt the blood drain from her face. Fury flared in her chest, but she kept it contained. Robb's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. You speak of treason, Robb said coldly. Yet it was your family who beheaded my father under false pretenses. You who hold my sisters captive. You who have brought war upon the realm. Joffrey's face twisted in rage. He drew breath, likely to spew more insults, but Tywin placed a hand on his shoulder. The old lion's expression was calculating, his gaze sweeping over Robb and Margaery. We are prepared to negotiate terms, Tywin said in a measured tone, ignoring Joffrey's outburst. But understand this, King's Landing is well fortified. If you storm the walls, the city will burn. Thousands of innocents will die. Do you want that on your conscience, Stark? Margaery stepped forward, chin held high. The innocents suffer already under Joffrey's cruelty. Release my good sister Sansa Stark and any others you hold, and the realm might yet be spared a final battle. Cersei's lips curved in a condescending smirk. You overestimate your position, girl. Our spies tell us Walder Frey stands ready to cut off your supply lines once more. Your alliance cannot last forever. Robb's voice was steady. We have defeated every army you've sent against us. Your city stands on the brink of revolt. Surrender the throne, yield the city, and the North will remember your house with some measure of mercy. Joffrey let out a strangled laugh. You think you can overthrow the crown? He turned to his king's guard. Cut them down, all of them. A stunned pause ensued. The Great Jon and Ser Loras tensed, ready to defend their king. Archers on both sides knocked arrows. It seemed the parley teetered on the edge of becoming a slaughter. Tywin quickly grabbed Joffrey's arm, preventing him from giving the kill order. The Lannister patriarch's voice rang out. The boy is impetuous, but we are not so foolish as to break parley in front of all these witnesses. He locked eyes with Robb. However, if you proceed with your siege, you'll find this city is not so easily taken. Robb met that gaze, unyielding. Then so be it, he said softly. He glanced at Joffrey, then Cersei, and turned his horse away. Margaery followed suit. Their guard withdrew in a disciplined formation. Up on the walls, Joffrey cursed and spat, flinging insults after them. But no volley of arrows followed. The lines remained tense but still. That night, back at camp, the decision was made. They would proceed with the siege, but with hopes that the small folk might open the gates before the city starved. Supplies from the Reach would sustain Robb's army through the winter as best they could. If Walder Frey tried to disrupt them, Bolton and Ser Loras would respond again. Exhausted, the war-weary men prepared for what might be the final stand. In the quiet darkness, Robb and Margaery found each other again. She saw the strain in his posture, the weight of thousands of lives resting on his shoulders. He studied her face, perhaps fearing for her safety in the events to come. But neither spoke of retreat. The vow they had taken bound them to a path that might reshape the Seven Kingdoms or shatter them. They held each other, listening to the distant murmur of the camp, to the flicker of torches. Outside, the walls of King's Landing loomed, and far behind them, the specter of Walder. Frey's treachery glimmered in the north. Yet in that moment, with her head against his chest, Margaery felt a sense of calm. They had come so far, endured so much. Together, they would see this through to whatever end awaited them in the dawn. And so the siege began, overshadowed by the long night of looming winter, with a king in the north and his Tyrell queen poised on the threshold of history. The realm itself held its breath, waiting to see if the Rose and the Wolf might tear down the gilded cage of the Lannisters once and for all, or if Walder Frey's last betrayal would tilt the balance back into darkness. In that precarious balance lay the fate of every man, woman, and child, from the icy heights of the Wall to the sunlit groves of Dorne. Each morning, the drums of war called anew, and through it all, Robb Stark and Margaery Tyrell, bound by a marriage forged in desperation, dared to hope for a future shaped not by old oaths broken but by the promise of what they might build together. The days that followed the tense parley brought no further invitations to talk, no new offers from within the walls of King's Landing. The Lannister banners still flew high above the crenellations, and now the threat of winter's chill hovered over the plains by the Blackwater Rush. The sun hung low in the sky each afternoon, setting early and painting the western horizon with streaks of orange and purple. The siege lines of the Northern and Tyrell alliance stretched in a great arc before the walls, a formidable encampment of tents, palisades, and sharpened stakes to ward against sorties. At night, watchfires flared, and scouts scoured the roads for signs of any relief force that might slip past. Inside the camp, King Robb Stark and his queen, Margaery, faced a grueling test of leadership. Though they had achieved a crushing victory against the Lannister army in open battle, laying siege to King's Landing was no simple matter. The city's walls were tall and thick, the gates heavily guarded. The defenders had mounted scorpions, ballistae, and other engines of war on the ramparts, all capable of raining death down upon any who drew too close. It would be a costly endeavor to launch a full-scale assault, but every day that passed brought them closer to winter's deeper bite. Supplies, even with the vast stores from Highgarden, would not last forever in the face of a siege. More vexing still was the uncertain stance of Walder Frey, who remained coiled behind his fortress in the north, waiting like a vulture for the perfect moment to strike. For many of the soldiers in Robb's host, this was their first prolonged siege. They were accustomed to swift marches and decisive engagements, to the hammer-blow strategy that had won them the earlier battles. Now they sat waiting, day after day, building entrenchments and watchtowers instead of meeting the enemy face to face. Boredom mixed with fear. The men busied themselves fletching arrows, sharpening swords, digging trenches, hauling timber, hunting game in the nearby countryside, anything to pass the long hours. In that fragile quiet, small folk from outlying villages approached the camp in ragged groups, gaunt and fearful. They came seeking refuge, for the roads to the north and west were perilous, and the city gates had been sealed shut by Joffrey's orders. Margaery insisted these desperate folk be given food and shelter. She walked among them, distributing loaves and warm cloaks where she could. Winter was at the doorstep, and each gesture of mercy endeared her to the refugees. Some of the northern lords grumbled that these extra mouths threatened their rations, but Robb silenced them, telling them that a just king did not turn away innocents to starve. Margaery's ladies followed her example, comforting children, organizing meager tents. The name of the Rose Queen spread among the displaced, a beacon of warmth in the cold. Yet Margaery and Robb both knew compassion alone would not topple Joffrey's regime. Each evening they weighed plans for infiltration or sabotage. The gates were sealed, the city watch patrolled from atop the walls, and the impoverished masses within King's Landing languished under punishing taxes and dwindling food. Cersei, Tywin, and Joffrey controlled the Red Keep, hoarding what provisions remained for their own. The Wolf King's offers of mercy circulated through the streets, quietly passed among the small folk by hidden sympathizers, but few dared risk openly defying the Lannisters. Gossip held that the Gold Cloaks were quick to arrest any who voiced support for the besieging army. Robb convened war councils daily in the largest pavilion near the center of the camp. It was a tent of heavy canvas, supported by wooden beams, decorated only with the direwolf banner at the entrance and a small embroidered rose near the flap, signifying House Tyrell's presence. Inside, an oak table stood in the middle, maps of the Crownlands and the city's walls spread across it. Around this table gathered the key figures of the allied host: the great Jon Umber, gruff and impatient; Roose Bolton, pale and unreadable; Edmure Tully, representing the Riverlands' concerns; Ser Loras Tyrell, battered but unbroken from the fighting in the north; and other captains from both the north and the Reach. Margaery sat to one side, her posture straight, listening intently. Whenever the conversation shifted to the city's politics or the disposition of lords within the Reach, she spoke with clarity. On a brisk morning, as a chill wind rattled the tent flaps, the council gathered to decide if they would risk storming the walls. Silence fell when Robb, clad in the simple gray and brown leathers he preferred in the field, spoke. "Our scouts say the Lannisters are rationing grain inside the walls," he began, eyes flicking to each of his lords. "Small folk starve while the Red Keep's larders remain full, or near enough. If we hold this siege longer, the city might revolt." The Great Jon let out a guttural laugh. "Revolt, aye. Let the small folk tear down Joffrey's walls from within." Ser Loras's expression was less certain. A revolt in those cramped streets could turn savage. The Gold Cloaks might punish the small folk, and blood would run ankle-deep. King's Landing has a history of riots. None ended well for the common folk. Margaery spoke quietly. Our best hope is that the people realize help stands outside these walls. If enough of them demand that the gates open, if the city watches split, the Lannisters could face an uprising. But we can't simply wait forever, especially with Walder Frey at our backs. Then we provoke them, said Edmure Tully. If we tighten the siege, cut off any last trickle of food, the city's lesser wards may rebel first. Roose Bolton's voice slid into the conversation. Desperation can breed chaos, my lords. The results of such an uprising are unpredictable. Robb gazed down at the map, lined with scribbled notes marking the city gates. The King's Gate, the Lion Gate, the Dragon Gate. A direct assault on these gates would cost thousands of lives. Trebuchets can batter the walls, but the Red Keep would remain a fortress even if we broke into the city streets. We risk a slaughter, especially if wildfire still sits in the city's vaults. A shadow passed across Ser Loras's face at the mention of wildfire. He remembered well the stories of King Aerys and the caches hidden beneath King's Landing. We must consider that possibility, he said. Cersei may prefer to burn the city rather than let it fall into your hands. The tent fell silent at that grim thought. The Great John scowled, arms crossed over his broad chest. We're damned if we do, damned if we don't, he muttered. We can't allow the Lannisters time to gather more men, but we can't risk them turning the city into an inferno. Robb's eyes flicked to Margaery. We continue as we are, maintaining the siege lines, encouraging the small folk to see us as liberators. We can escalate pressure, but we must not blindly rush the walls. If new developments arise, we'll adjust. The meeting ended on that sobering note, each lord returning to his segment of the camp. In the following days, Robb had men scour the farmland for any hidden pockets of produce that might still be smuggled into King's Landing. They found little. The blockade became tighter, forcing any trader or traveler to pass thorough checks, effectively strangling the capital's food supply. Margaery found no joy in starving out the city, but the cruelty was not theirs alone. Joffrey had chosen to keep the gates sealed, even against his own people's pleas. Yet, just as the Alliance tried to maintain its chokehold, bad news trickled south from the Riverlands. Walder Frey, restless in his anger, had sent mounted skirmishers to threaten villages loyal to the Tullus. Some of these riders pushed as far as the fringes of the Allied supply lines, capturing wagons or burning small outposts. A few Frey banners even appeared on the outskirts of the siege camp one dawn, as though to mock the king in the north, letting him see that they could creep near whenever they pleased. Though the damage was minimal for the moment, the message was chilling. Walder Frey would not relent. One foggy morning, a rider pounded into the northern perimeter carrying a message sealed with the flayed man of House Bolton. The Freys had managed to ambush a key supply caravan near Maidenpool, slaughtering half the guards. Bolton men had driven them off, but not before the caravan was set ablaze. Word spread quickly through the camp, stoking fear and anger. It was a small blow but symbolic. The Wolf King's hold on the lines was no longer absolute. That evening, Margaery joined Robb in his personal tent. Outside, the camp was alive with chatter. Some men cursing the Freys, others worried about depleting rations. Robb sat on a low wooden stool, elbows braced on his knees. Grey Wind lay on a rug nearby, ears perked as Margaery entered. She knelt next to Robb, carefully placing a hand on his shoulder. Roose Bolton's letter said he's reinforced the caravan routes with more men. The Freys shouldn't be able to strike so easily again. Robb's eyes lifted to meet hers, and she saw weariness etched into them. Walder Frey plays a waiting game. He can whittle at us bit by bit, hoping to force a mistake, or perhaps even bargain with the Lannisters behind our backs. Meanwhile, we're stuck outside King's Landing, waiting for Joffrey to yield. You've led us this far, she said softly. We've achieved more than anyone expected. Tywin is broken. The city stands on the brink of collapse. He ran a hand through his auburn hair. But if winter sinks its claws in and we're still out here, with the Freys harassing our supply lines, the men will starve in the cold. Margaery, we must find a way inside those walls. She rose to her feet, glancing around the tent. Maps lay scattered on a small table. A half-finished letter to Caitlin Tully rested beside them, lines of neat script describing the difficulties at the siege. Margaery understood in that moment that Robb faced not just an enemy but also time itself, the unstoppable march of the seasons. "If the city doesn't open its gates soon, we might attempt a ruse," she offered. "Smuggle in a small force to spark a rising, or bribe guards. There must be some captain of the Gold Cloaks who'd prefer to see Joffrey deposed rather than endure a slow death." Robb considered her words. "It's dangerous, but maybe you're right. If we could slip a group in through the Mud Gate or the Old River Gate under cover of darkness, start a riot from within. We'd have to time it exactly, storming from outside while they cause chaos inside." He stood, the idea clearly igniting something in him. A night attack might catch them unawares, especially if the watch is paid off to look the other way. "Find the right man to bribe, and half the city watch might switch allegiance," Margaery said, recalling how the Gold Cloaks had turned on Ned Stark in the days of King Robert's death. "They've done it before. They'll do it again for the right price." Robb rested his hands on her shoulders, expression kindling with a spark of hope. "You've got a keen mind for these matters," he murmured. "I'll speak with Bolton. He knows some cunning men in the field. And Loras has connections in the city. He might know which watch captains still harbor loyalty to the Tyrell name." She squeezed his hands. "Whatever we do, we must do it soon. I can feel winter's breath in the wind." Together, they resolved to attempt a clandestine infiltration, a plan fraught with risk. But war had taught them that caution alone could be lethal when time was slipping away. In the days that followed, secret letters were dispatched under the cover of night. Envoys disguised as poor travelers approached city guards and petty officials offering gold for cooperation. Most times, they found cold rejection, for the watchers on the wall feared Tywin's retribution far more than coin. But after a week of attempts, Ser Loras quietly informed Robb and Margaery that at least one captain of the Gold Cloaks was willing to listen. This man, said to be disgruntled at the royal court's cruelty, might open a small postern gate near the river gate if offered enough gold and if the army outside mounted a simultaneous distraction elsewhere. Negotiations continued in code, carried by a cunning squire who slipped in and out of the city with false papers. Every step risked betrayal, but they pressed on. Meanwhile, inside King's Landing, conditions worsened. Anonymous reports came to the Allied camp. Bread riots had broken out in Flea Bottom, shops looted, crates of meager supplies stolen. The Gold Cloaks fought to contain the unrest, but the small folk were hungry and furious. Joffrey responded with brutal crackdowns, sending the King's Guard into the streets to make examples of perceived traitors. Mothers wailed for their children, and angry crowds scrawled curses against the Lannisters on walls and doors. Rumors circulated that some of the highborn lords inside the city had begun whispering of surrender, anything to stop the city from tearing itself apart. But as long as Tywin stood behind Joffrey with the remnants of his guard, no open defiance was tolerated. At last, the infiltration plan took shape in full. Under the cloak of midnight, Robb would lead a feint at the main gate, staging a raucous attack that would draw defenders to the walls. At the same time, a small strike force, guided by Margaery's network of bribed guards, would slip through the postern gate near the river gate. Their goal, race through the lower wards of the city, incite the small folk to riot, and either seize or open the nearest gate from inside. Once the gate swung wide, the Allied army could surge in. If it worked, King's Landing might fall in a single bloody night. If it failed, the infiltration team would be butchered in the streets, and the entire siege might collapse. Robb insisted on leading the infiltration himself. Many of his lords protested, Edmure Tully, the Great John, Roose Bolton, but Robb remained adamant. "I won't ask men to risk their lives where I'm not willing to go," he said. "My presence might rally the city's folk if they see the king in the north come to free them from Joffrey." Margaery, upon hearing his decision, confronted him in private. "You're the king," she said, voice taut with worry. "Your men need you alive. If this infiltration goes astray..." He clasped her hands. "If I hide at the rear, it sends the wrong message. These attempts often fail because too few are willing to stand at the front. We must show the people inside that our cause is real, that we're not just a rumor beyond the gates." Her eyes searched his face. "Then at least allow me to go with you." He shook his head at once. "It's too dangerous. If the infiltration is discovered, there'll be chaos in the streets. You'd be a target beyond measure. Joffrey would pay a fortune to see you captured. I need you here to coordinate the main assault if we get the gate open." She wanted to argue, but she knew he spoke sense. And so she bowed her head. "Then promise me you'll take trusted men. Great John, perhaps? Or Roose? Ser Loras?" Ser Loras and the Great John, yes. Bolton, he's more useful overseeing the feint, I think. He's got a mind for cunning, and he won't hesitate to exploit any gap in the defenses if the Lannisters shift their focus. Robb exhaled. I hate dividing the leadership, but each man has a role to play. We'll keep ravens at the ready in case we can open the gate quickly. She lifted her hands to his face. Then come back to me, she whispered. Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. We've lost too many. Let's not lose each other. He pressed his forehead to hers, a moment of stolen peace. I will. And when this city is ours, we'll decide the realm's fate together. They parted on the eve of the plan. Outside, the camp's torches flickered in a stiff breeze. Robb spent the early hours of the night gathering his infiltration force, the Great John and his best swords, Ser Loras Tyrell with a handful of skilled knights and several dozen footmen chosen for their stealth and loyalty. They outfitted themselves lightly, no clanking plate armor that would betray them in the streets. Instead, they wore leather jerkins and boiled leathers, swords strapped tight, helmets that could be cast off quickly if needed. Some men dyed their cloaks to look drab and nondescript, hoping to pass as city dwellers if darkness and confusion were enough of a shroud. Shortly after midnight, Margaery watched from the edge of the camp as Robb mounted a sturdy, dark-coated horse. He carried only a sword at his belt, a simpler blade than the one he typically bore into battle, its hilt wrapped in plain leather to avoid gleaming in torchlight. Grey Wind waited at his side, ears forward, sensing the tension. A few men muttered about bringing a dire wolf into a stealth mission, but Robb would not hear of leaving Grey Wind behind. The wolf had saved his life more than once, and in the shadowed streets he might serve as a fearsome advantage. The king in the north bent down, placing a hand on Margaery's shoulder. Stand ready. If all goes well, you'll see the eastern gate open by dawn. Or you'll hear the horns. She tried to force a smile. May the gods be with you. Her heart hammered a steady drum of anxiety in her chest, but she kept her composure before the onlooking soldiers. And then he was gone, riding off into the darkness with the infiltration party trailing behind, hooves muffled by rags and soft earth. Margaery stood there, alone in the chilly wind, until they faded from sight. Only then did she turn and stride toward the command pavilion, taking up her post to coordinate the feint. The plan was set. At the darkest hour, Roose Bolton and several battalions of archers would launch a false assault on the main gate, lighting torches, banging swords against shields, shouting war cries. The Lannisters would rush to the battlements, focusing on repelling what seemed to be a genuine onslaught. Meanwhile, Robb's party would slip in through the postern gate if the bribed captain kept his word. Hours crawled by in taut silence. The main camp seemed to hold its collective breath. Men fiddled with bows, checked arrow fletchings, or prayed softly to their gods. Margaery stood at the center of a ring of lords and officers, all awaiting a signal. The flickering glow of lanterns revealed anxious faces. She heard a distant horn, 2 short blasts. The false assault was beginning. From her vantage near the command pavilion, she could see torches suddenly blazing bright along the main gate. The clang of steel echoed through the night as Bolton's men hurled themselves forward, yelling and banging shields. Arrows whistled down from the walls, and the gold cloak's own horns brayed in alarm. In the gloom, the watchers atop the ramparts looked frantic, uncertain how large this attacking force was. Margaery forced herself not to flinch each time an arrow found a target. Men on both sides would die for this ruse. But with luck, their sacrifice would buy Robb the opening he needed. Far away to the east, in the shadows near the river gate, Robb and his infiltration force dismounted amid a cluster of abandoned huts. Grey Wind padded silently at his side, sniffing the air. The Great John and Ser Loras each led a small group, fanning out to guard the approach. A single cloaked figure, a squire from the Tyrell ranks who had orchestrated the bribe, slipped ahead to knock a secret rhythm on a heavy wooden door. After a tense moment, it creaked open from within. The gold cloak captain stood in a small passage, face half hidden by the flicker of a lantern. His eyes darted nervously over the armed men in the darkness. "You've the gold?" he hissed. Ser Loras nodded, signaling a pair of soldiers who carried a small chest. "Half now, half after you open the gate," Loras said in a tight whisper. "You remember our agreement? No one else needs to die if you keep your men back." The captain swallowed, glancing at Robb's dire wolf with wide eyes. Then he beckoned them forward. The infiltration force pressed inside, navigating a damp corridor that led beneath an archway. The stench of stagnant water and mold clung to the air. At the far end, a metal gate barred the exit to the city proper. Torches glowed faintly beyond. The guard captain drew a ring of keys from his belt, each jangle echoing too loudly in Robb's ears. Every second, he feared discovery. He imagined Lannister soldiers just around the corner, or worse, a trap. But the captain seemed sincere in his desperation for gold. With trembling hands, he found the correct key and slid it into the lock. A heavy clank echoed. Then the gate creaked open, revealing a narrow alley lined with dilapidated shacks. The night air smelled of sewage and rot. Far off, they could hear shouting, the commotion from the main gate where Bolton staged the false assault. Robb motioned for silence, and the infiltration force slipped through. Their footsteps made soft scuffs on the muddy ground. The captain pointed down the alley, gesturing toward a labyrinth of twisting paths. "You'll come to Flea Bottom soon enough," he whispered. "Many are awake at this hour. Desperate folk." His eyes cut to Robb. "If your men start trouble, the small folk won't wait for the gold cloaks to protect them." Robb nodded, forcing calm. "We're here to set them free of Joffrey, not to slaughter them. Just do your part." The captain backed away, clearly eager to retreat. Ser Loras signaled the chest-bearer to crack open the lid. Inside, by lamplight, the captain saw glints of gold. His breath caught. "I'll keep my men away as long as I can," he said. Then he turned and left them to their mission, disappearing with the bribe. Robb, the Great John, and Ser Loras exchanged a quick glance. "Stick to the plan," Robb murmured. "We head for the Street of Flower, circle around to the gate's courtyard. If all goes right, we open the gate from inside. Loras, half your knights handle the gate's mechanism. Great John, keep watch for gold cloaks who don't take the captain's bribe. If we're discovered, fight hard and fast. We must cause enough chaos to get that gate open." They divided into small squads, merging into the dark alleyways. Robb led the central group, gray wind pacing at his side, ears pricked. The city enveloped them like a living maze. Wooden shacks leaning drunkenly against each other, winding alleys strewn with refuse. Pale lanterns hung from sagging ropes overhead, revealing ragged faces peering from cracked windows. Some of the poor souls gasped or ducked away at the sight of armed strangers. But Robb's men moved quickly, whispering that the Wolf King had come to end Joffrey's cruelty. As the infiltration group passed, more curious onlookers emerged, some muttering in confusion, others with a spark of hope in their eyes. Soon, the sounds of distant battle, roaring and echoing from the main gate, mingled with the growing stir in these cramped neighborhoods. The infiltration force pressed forward, hugging the shadows. At one intersection, they encountered a lone patrol of 3 gold cloaks. The Great John, in the lead, seized upon them before they could raise an alarm. A brief, brutal scuffle ended with 2 gold cloaks dead and 1 fleeing. Robb cursed under his breath. The fleeing guard might warn others. They had to move faster. Flea Bottom itself seethed with restlessness. Fires burned in metal braziers, and half-clothed children scampered away from the armed men. In one corner, a group of starved townsfolk glared at them with hollow eyes. Robb's men carried small coin pouches, tossing a few coppers to those who seemed on the verge of desperation. "We come to save you from the Lannisters," one soldier whispered to a shivering woman cradling an infant. "Stay indoors if you can. The streets won't be safe tonight." The woman, eyes wide, clutched the coins and nodded. The infiltration force pressed on. Above them, in the higher wards, alarm bells pealed. The main gate assault must still be raging, or at least persisting as a loud distraction. Closer now, they could see the looming shape of the city walls that surrounded King's Landing. Their target, the eastern gate that opened onto the Blackwater near the mouth of the river. If they could fling it open, Margaery and the allied host would surge inside. But 2 main obstacles remained: the gate's guardhouse, likely manned by more loyal gold cloaks, and any Lannister detachments who might be nearby. They came upon the Street of Flower, so called for the old mills and bakeries that once operated there. Now it was deserted and half-ruined by neglect. 2 watchtowers guarded the gate from inside. Robb's squad halted behind a stack of crates. He peered around the corner, counting the silhouettes atop the gatehouse. At least a score of men patrolled there, plus more behind the walls. He glanced at Ser Loras and the Great John, who crouched nearby. "We strike fast," Robb whispered. "Ser Loras, your men hit the tower on the left. Great John, take the right. I'll go straight for the gate's winding mechanism. Once we get it open, we blow the horn. Margaery's watchers will hear." Grey Wind gave a low growl, muzzle lifting to scent the air. Tension coiled in Robb's stomach. They had to succeed before the entire city guard descended on them. He signaled with a clenched fist and the infiltration force surged forward. Shouts erupted at once. A pair of gold cloaks posted on the street corner cried alarm. One raised a horn to his lips, but the Great John barreled into him with a roar, sending him crashing to the ground. Steel rang against steel as the infiltration group charged the gatehouse. Grey Wind bounded ahead, leaping at the nearest guard with snapping jaws. Robb sprinted after the direwolf, sword in hand, parrying a slash from a gold cloak who lunged at him. He pivoted, driving his blade into the man's side, then wheeled toward the winding gear. Ser Loras's knights swarmed up the stairs to the left tower, clashing with defenders. The narrow steps echoed with the clang of swords. Men shouted in pain or fury. Meanwhile, the Greyjohn's portion of the group assaulted the right tower, voices raised in the north's familiar war cries. Another wave of gold cloaks poured into the courtyard from a side street, clearly drawn by the noise. The infiltration force braced for a fierce melee. Robb located the heavy wooden wheel that controlled the gate's main bar, an iron-reinforced beam that would need to be lifted to swing open. He rushed to it, Grey Wind snarling at his side, only to find 3 gold cloaks scrambling to guard the mechanism. One brandished a spear, the other 2 carried short swords. For a moment, Robb's breath came in sharp bursts. He could feel the sweat on his brow despite the cool night air. If he failed to clear these men, the gate would remain closed and the infiltration would be in vain. He lunged at the spearman, forcing him backward with a flurry of strikes. The man, though frightened, managed to parry once, twice, but Grey Wind seized his leg, pulling him down. Robb's sword hammered past the man's guard and ended his struggles. The other 2 guards attacked at once, one from the side, one from behind. Robb twisted, barely deflecting a slash aimed at his back. Sparks flew where steel met steel. Grey Wind sprang again, latching onto a guard's arm, but the guard stabbed at the wolf's flank, making Grey Wind yelp in pain. Rage flared through Robb. He bashed the second guard's blade aside, then rammed into him bodily, using his superior strength and fury to knock the man off balance. A quick thrust ended it. The last guard, seeing 2 of his comrades down, turned to flee. The Great John, having just bowled over another foe, slammed a broad arm across the fleeing guard's path and hewed him down with a single stroke of his massive sword. Blood spattered across the wheel apparatus. "We have it," the Great John roared. His beard was matted with sweat, and his eyes gleamed with the battle lust that had made him a legend among the northern lords. Robb knelt at Grey Wind's side, heart pounding. The wolf's flank bled, but not grievously, no vital organs pierced, from what he could see. "Easy, boy," he murmured. Grey Wind whined softly, but licked Robb's arm as though to say he was still in the fight. "Get that gate open," Ser Loras called from above, sword slick with blood as he defended the tower steps. More gold cloaks were arriving, their voices carrying the alarm. Robb rose, ignoring the tremor in his arms, and took hold of the wooden wheel. 2 of his men joined him, muscles straining as they pushed. The mechanism groaned. The iron bar that locked the gate began to lift inch by inch, squealing in protest. A wave of gold cloaks rushed forward, trying to stop them, but the Great John and a ring of northern swordsmen formed a barrier, hacking and slashing at any who came near. Outside, in the siege camp, Margaery strained her eyes toward the eastern gate. The false assault at the main entrance continued, a thunder of drums and horns. She knew that if Robb succeeded, he would blow a single long horn blast, the signal that the gate was opening. If he failed, there would be none, or worse, they might hear an alarm from the city. She prayed to any god who would listen, old gods, the 7, even the drowned gods of Pike if they cared, to keep Robb safe. The minutes dragged by, each heartbeat echoing in her chest. The lords around her fidgeted. Edmure Tully paced in circles, muttering to himself. Roose Bolton stood impassive, listening for any change in the city's tumult. Then, cutting through the night, came a single, resonant horn blast from within the walls. The note wavered but rose strong in the darkness. Margaery's heart nearly leapt into her throat. Cheers rippled through the allied forces. "That's the signal," a soldier yelled. "The king is inside." Margaery wasted no time. She turned to Edmure Tully and Roose Bolton. "Form the men," she commanded. "Move on the eastern gate at once. We must be there before the Lannisters can reseal it." The horns on the allied line responded with a triumphant call. Drums began pounding a new rhythm. Thousands of men who had waited in taut readiness now marched east in a broad formation, torchlight illuminating the battered plain. Cavalry trotted at the flanks, footmen in the center, archers behind. Margaery rode at the head, flanked by Edmure Tully carrying the Tully Trout banner and a vanguard of Tyrell knights bearing the rose. She wore a fitted cuirass over her dark gown, her hair pinned tightly, her posture bold despite the terror that still fluttered inside her. She had no illusions about what awaited them. Entering a city in the throes of battle was dangerous, but the gate was open, and that meant a chance to end the siege in a single day. At the gate, Robb and his men had finally lifted the massive bar and swung the creaking doors ajar. The infiltration force, battered from the fight, stood guard while Robb blew a horn to signal success. Gold cloaks in the courtyard milled in confusion, uncertain whether to fight or flee. Some dropped their weapons altogether, others charged forward, only to be cut down by the Grachan's ferocity or Ser Loras's knights. The moment the gate cracked wide, the infiltration force pushed it fully open with a combined heave of shoulders, revealing the blackness beyond the walls, and then, far in the distance, the flicker of torches coming to meet them. Robb's heart soared at the sight. They had done it. He raised his sword high, rallying his men. "Hold this gate until our army arrives," he shouted above the din for the north. For the reach, cheers intermingled with the clash of steel as the infiltration force fought to keep the opening clear. Grey Wind, despite his wound, lunged at gold cloaks who ventured too close. Bodies piled near the threshold, and the stench of blood and sweat hung in the chill air. The gold cloaks were not the only threat. Near the rear of the courtyard, a small unit of Lannister guardsmen, men wearing the golden lion on their surcoats, emerged from a broad avenue that led deeper into the city. At their head strode a tall knight with a crimson plume on his helmet. He barked an order, and the Lannisters advanced in tight formation. Arrows whistled overhead, loosed by archers perched on rooftops. One of Robb's men cried out as a shaft found his neck. Robb caught the Grachan's eye. "Break them," he roared. The Great John rushed headlong into the Lannisters, swinging his great sword in wide arcs, while Robb and a few swordsmen flanked from the side. A vicious melee erupted, steel on steel. The tall knight aimed a powerful strike at the Grachan's side, but the northerner bellowed and slammed him backward, staggering him. Robb seized the moment, thrusting his blade into the knight's exposed armpit. The man collapsed, gargling blood. The rest of the Lannisters broke ranks and scattered or surrendered. By the time Margaery and the allied vanguard arrived, the courtyard beyond the eastern gate was littered with bodies. Torchlight revealed Robb's men standing amid the carnage, panting but victorious. The Grachan's beard dripped with sweat and gore, Ser Loras's knights were spattered with blood. Robb himself leaned against the gate's winding mechanism, breathing heavily while Grey Wind stood protectively at his side, muzzle flecked with red. Relief flooded Margaery at the sight of him alive, bruised and bloody, but breathing. She rode through the gate amid cheers and disbelieving stares from the infiltration force. Robb straightened, stepping forward to help her dismount. For an instant, they forgot the chaos around them. His arms encircled her waist in a fierce embrace. "You made it," she breathed, voice trembling with relief. He pressed his forehead to hers. "We open the gate? Hurry, bring everyone inside. We must press on to the Red Keep before the Lannisters can regroup." Already, thousands of allied troops were streaming in. Archers took up positions in the gatehouse, driving off any gold cloaks that dared show themselves on nearby rooftops. Foemen advanced in disciplined columns, wary of ambush. The small folk of the eastern wards, seeing the new arrivals, began to emerge in the streets, some cheering, some simply staring in shock. Cries of the Wolf King and Queen Margaery mingled with the chaos of war. Sensing the tide had turned, more gold cloaks dropped their weapons and slunk away, unwilling to die for Joffrey's cause. Yet the city's heart remained in Lannister control. From the Red Keep high on Aegon's Hill, horns blared a harsh alarm. The faint glow of torchlight flickered from the castle walls. Robb and Margaery both knew that was their final objective. If Joffrey, Tywin, and Cersei were permitted to hold the Red Keep, the city could not truly be called conquered. And if they had any final reserves of wildfire or loyal swords, they would use them now, with desperation fueling their ruthlessness. "Form ranks," Robb commanded his captains. "We take the main avenues, but watch for hidden defenders. We'll make for the Red Keep in force." He turned to Margaery, concern etched into his features. "You should remain here at the gate, coordinate the occupation." She shook her head. "The men need to see me by your side. So do the people of the city. If we intend to rule them, they must know we won't cower. I'll ride with you behind the first line." Robb hesitated, but the determination in her eyes was unshakable. Finally, he nodded. "Stay close then. Let's end this." And so they advanced. The allied army moved through the city like a rising tide. Bells tolled, and some folk in the upper wards shouted warnings from windows. Others waved scraps of cloth in surrender or hurled insults at the Whelp King Joffrey. Shops had been boarded up, doors barred, but knots of hungry citizens lingered in the lanes, uncertain whether to flee or greet their supposed liberators. Margaery rode behind the Greyjohn's vanguard with Robb at her side, each flanked by guards. Ser Loras led a contingent of Tyrell knights to secure the narrower alleyways, preventing any sudden flank attack. The further they went, the stiffer the resistance became. Isolated pockets of Lannister loyalists and gold cloaks tried to block wide streets with overturned wagons or spikes, but the allied host battered through, using axes to clear the path. Archers perched in upper windows were driven out by hailstorms of arrows from the northern bowmen below. Gradually, the allied force reached the heart of the city. Before them, Aegon's high hill rose, crowned by the massive silhouette of the Red Keep. The castle gates were shut tight. Dozens of archers lined the battlements, and the flicker of braziers hinted at pitch or wildfire readiness. Robb halted the march to survey the situation. The men bunched up behind him, many drawing ragged breaths. Corpses lay in the streets, some gold cloaks, some unfortunate small folk caught in the crossfire. Smoke drifted from scattered fires. The city moaned with the anguish of battle. "We'll have to breach the castle gates," Robb said to Margaery in a low tone. "Or find another approach. We've no siege towers inside the city, but we do have rams." Even as he spoke, the Red Keep's gates rumbled open unexpectedly. A column of mounted knights rode out in formation, the gold lion of House Lannister emblazoned on their shields. At their head galloped a knight in gilded armor, a magnificent but forbidding sight. Tywin Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, bore the lion helm. Beside him rode two of the Kingsguard in white cloaks, swords drawn. A hush fell as the Lannister knights drew to a stop several dozen yards from Robb's lines. Tywin lifted his visor, revealing a hard, weathered face. His green eyes flicked over the allied ranks with a mixture of calculation and disdain. "King in the north," he called, voice echoing across the courtyard. "You've taken the city, it seems. Yet the Red Keep stands. Must the streets run red with more blood?" Robb spurred his horse forward a few paces, Grey Wind limping alongside him with a bandaged flank. Margaery stayed close, body tense. The Greyjohn and Ser Loras formed up on either side, swords at the ready in case this was a trick. "It's your choice, Lord Tywin," Robb replied, voice carrying in the unnatural hush. "Yield. Open the Red Keep, release my sisters and any other prisoners you hold, and we can end this. If you resist, we'll tear those walls down. You've seen how many men I have behind me." Tywin's gaze flicked to Margaery, then back to Robb. "You fancy yourselves the realm's saviors. You starve the city, bribe its watch, and storm its gates in the night. Hundreds lie dead in your wake. And you dare call Joffrey cruel? A paragon of hypocrisy." Fury churned in Margaery's chest, but she kept her tone measured. "Your grandson, if that is what you wish to call him, has tormented the realm long enough. The people starve because of his war, his taxes, his madness. Surrender, Lord Tywin, and spare the city further ruin. We have the advantage." Tywin's lips pressed into a thin line. He lifted a hand, gesturing behind him. Several standard-bearers advanced, hoisting tattered Lannister banners. The gold lion, once a symbol of unassailable power, now seemed dingy in the flickering torchlight, overshadowed by the massed might of the wolf and the rose. Even so, Tywin radiated an air of unbroken pride. "Perhaps you do have the advantage," he said, glancing at the archers stationed on the Red Keep's walls. "But do you dare risk the life of your sisters, Stark? Or the rest of the innocents within? If you assault the keep, Joffrey's orders are to unleash wildfire in the city. Thousands more will die." A ripple of dread spread through the allied ranks. They all remembered the stories of King Aerys. Wildfire was no idle threat. Margaery's throat went dry. "Think of your own men, Lord Tywin," she said. "Your own house. Will you sacrifice them for Joffrey's madness?" For a moment, Tywin did not answer. Silence stretched. Then came a sudden commotion behind him. The Kingsguard parted, revealing Joffrey Baratheon himself, perched on a white horse that pranced nervously. He wore gilded armor too large for his slight frame, a golden crown jammed over his helm. Cersei rode beside him, her face pale and taut with anger. Joffrey brandished a crossbow of all things, pointing it wildly at the allied host. "You dare speak of my madness?" he shrilled, voice cracking. "Traitors! I'll have your heads, all of you. Set the wildfire ablaze, burn the city if we must, better that than let a pack of wolves and roses defile my throne." Cersei reached for his arm, trying to calm him. "Joffrey, do not," but he shrugged her off, raising the crossbow and aiming at Robb in the distance. The Greyjohn tensed, half ready to charge forward, but Tywin let out a growl of frustration, spurring his own horse between Joffrey and Robb. "You'll do no such thing," Tywin snapped at Joffrey. "If we burn the city, we lose everything. The name of Lannister will be cursed for centuries. He turned back to Robb, voice cold. Is there a negotiated settlement you will accept? Robb's mind raced. He had to defuse Joffrey's mania without letting Tywin slip away. He raised his voice so all could hear. Surrender the castle. Relinquish the throne. Release my sisters, Sansa and Arya, at once, along with any other hostages. Lay down your arms. In exchange, I will guarantee safe passage for your family, excepting those who have committed crimes that demand justice. Joffrey howled, face reddening. That means me. And Mother. He wants our heads. I'll see him burn first. He struggled against Cersei's hold, but she gripped his arm, hissing something in his ear. Tywin's jaw worked as though he were crushing glass between his teeth. You forget, boy, he said icily to Joffrey. It is I who command these knights. If you defy me, you'll die with them. His gaze flicked to the gold-cloaked men behind him, and many lowered their eyes. The Lannister power structure was fracturing before the eyes of every soldier in that courtyard. Cersei's voice cut in, brittle and sharp. We cannot yield to traitors. But Tywin ignored her, leaning forward in his saddle, addressing Robb once more. The only chance you have of preserving King's Landing from wildfire is if we cease hostilities now. We'll open the gates of the Red Keep if you swear on your honor to spare us from immediate executions or humiliations. My grandson, Not your grandson, Margaery interjected quietly, her voice carrying a note of challenge. She would not let Tywin maintain the lie of Joffrey's parentage. But Tywin brushed it aside with a dismissive glare. Joffrey, for all his faults, sits upon that throne. He may abdicate if forced. But if you storm the keep, he will give the order to release the wildfire. The city will burn no matter my own intentions. Robb hesitated, sweat beading on his temple. If Tywin truly had lost control of Joffrey, any move might spark disaster. He glanced at Margaery, who tightened her grip on the reins. We must ensure the safety of Sansa and Arya, he murmured to her. Then, raising his voice, open the keep. Come forth unarmed. Have Joffrey give the order to stand down. Then release my sisters. If these terms are met, I will accept your surrender. Lord Tywin, you will answer for your actions in a trial, but I give you my word that you will not be summarily executed if you comply. Joffrey screeched, You have no right, but Tywin cut him off, turning his horse so sharply that the animal sidestepped. You'll do as I say, Tywin snapped at the young king. This war is lost. He controls the city now. If you set it to flame, the Lannister name dies with it. Cersei stared at her father, horror dawning in her eyes. You cannot, this is madness. But Tywin's voice remained iron-hard. Send a rider to the keep, order the men to drop their weapons and open the gates fully. The city is taken. He looked at Robb, an eerie calm in his posture. You hold all the advantage. In return, we ask for safe conduct out of King's Landing once your sisters are produced. If we are to be tried for our alleged crimes, let it happen outside the city so no riot or mob lynching decides our fate. Robb felt the pounding of his heart, the old rage for how Ned Stark had been betrayed. Yet even that fury warred with relief. No more bloodshed on these streets, no wildfire to devour thousands. It could end here if Tywin was genuine. Agreed, he said at last, voice resonating with the hush that had fallen. Bring me my sisters, unhurt, and the city is yours no longer. Joffrey let out a keening wail of frustration, but Tywin glared him into submission. A Lannister knight rode off, presumably to deliver the order. The tension in the courtyard hung thick as fog. Minutes passed like hours until a column of Lannister soldiers emerged from the opened gates of the keep, weapons sheathed, shoulders slumped in defeat. Behind them, a small group of women in plain garb appeared, courtiers, servants, and 2 young girls with the look of northern features. Margaery recognized Sansa at once, tall, auburn hair, eyes wide with fear. Beside her stood Arya, shorter, dark-haired, grim-faced. Sansa had tears in her eyes, but Arya wore a scowl of pure defiance. Both looked battered by captivity. Robb's breath caught. He slid off his horse and rushed forward, ignoring the watchful eyes of Lannister knights. Sansa let out a cry when she saw him, half stumbling forward to meet him. Arya, fists clenched, tried to keep a veneer of stoicism, but her eyes shone with relief. Robb enveloped them both, tears escaping down his cheeks for the first time he could remember since the day he learned of his father's execution. Margaery dismounted and came to stand nearby, her chest tight with compassion for the Stark girls. You're safe now, Robb whispered, holding them close. Sansa sobbed into his shoulder while Arya muttered something about wanting to kill every Lannister in the city, voice cracking despite her bravado. Robb's heart broke at seeing how war had robbed his sisters of innocence. Meanwhile, Tywin oversaw Joffrey's meltdown. The Boy King ranted that he would have them all killed, that he would call upon the gods themselves for vengeance. But with the Lannister soldiers disarming and the entire allied host massed in the streets, there was no army left for Joffrey to command. One of the king's Ard tried to reason with him, but Joffrey only spat curses. At length, Tywin forced Joffrey and Cersei to dismount. Under the scowling eyes of northern guards, they relinquished their weapons. Cersei seemed in a state of shock. Joffrey glared murder, but with his crossbow taken away, he was reduced to shrill insults. The next hours were chaotic. Allied forces poured into the Red Keep, ensuring no pockets of loyalists or stashes of wildfire posed a threat. The storerooms were quickly secured, the staff ordered to remain calm under pain of execution if they tried any sabotage. Margaery, alongside Robb, established a provisional command in the throne room, that cavernous hall with the Iron Throne towering at one end. Torchlight illuminated the melted swords, the monstrous seat that had once been Aegon's symbol of conquest. Now it loomed over a city that had changed hands at last. "Long live the king in the north," came a ragged cheer from the allied soldiers who had jammed themselves into the throne room. Some hammered spear butts on the floor. Others stared in awe at the throne. The battered small folk who had followed also crowded near the doors, uncertain what came next. Margaery could feel their eyes on her as well. She stood on the dais, facing the throng. At her side was Robb, still stained with the night's battle, but possessing a quiet, potent presence that silenced the hall. His gaze rose to the Iron Throne, then swept over the people before him. Sansa and Arya stood with Catelyn Tully, who had arrived from the main gate in haste upon hearing the news. Mother and daughters clung to each other, a family reunited at long last. Edmure Tully and Roose Bolton waited in the wings, while the Great Jon glowered at the newly captured Lannisters. Joffrey, Tywin, and Cersei held under close guard. Ser Loras Tyrell and his knights looked on, faces drawn from exhaustion, but triumphant. A hush fell as Robb took a step forward. "People of King's Landing," he began, voice echoing in the high vaults, "hear me. I am Robb Stark, king in the north. I did not come here to subjugate you or burn your homes. I came to free you from tyranny." His eyes flicked to Joffrey, who spat on the ground. Guards jabbed the boy king's arm, forcing him back into silence. Robb continued, "For too long, the realm has bled under the misrule of those who saw the Iron Throne as a tool of fear. My father, Eddard Stark, was murdered for daring to speak truth. The North rose to defend itself. But this war has ravaged all corners of the land. Enough blood has been spilled. Today, the Lannisters yield and the city is liberated." A tentative cheer arose. Some in the crowd shouted approval, others simply watched, waiting to see how far this new king's mercy would stretch. Margaery stepped forward, speaking in a clear tone. "Let it be known that the small folk who lay down arms are pardoned. Any attempt to continue violence in the name of Joffrey will be punished by the king in the north. But we do not punish the innocent. Tonight, go to your homes. You will find bread and provisions distributed from the Red Keep stores, courtesy of the combined forces of the North and the Reach." At that, a louder cheer erupted, though it was tinged with desperation as much as gratitude. Margaery felt a wave of relief. This was how they could begin to heal the city, by feeding those who were starving, by showing that the wolf and the rose did not come as conquerors looking to pillage. But the hardest decisions still loomed. What to do with Joffrey, with Tywin, with the Iron Throne itself? Robb glanced at the monstrous seat of swords and seemed to weigh 1,000 possibilities in his mind. He had once declared the North would be free of the Iron Throne. Now he stood in the capital, the throne practically in his grasp. The realm watched. He turned to the Lannisters held under guard. Tywin stared straight ahead, betraying neither fear nor remorse. Cersei clutched Joffrey's arm, her face pale. Joffrey tried to speak, but the guard's lance at his throat silenced him. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath, half expecting Robb to order an immediate execution. Certainly, men like the Great Jon might have welcomed a swift end for them. But Robb's gaze flicked to Margaery, and she gave a small nod, recalling the vow he had made, that Tywin would face justice, not murder. Still, justice needed to be done. Robb's voice cut through the tension. "Cersei Lannister, you conspired in the death of my father, Joffrey Baratheon." He paused, choosing his words. "Or rather, Joffrey Waters, your son born of incest, took his head and tormented my sisters. Tywin Lannister led armies against the North and spilled innocent blood across the Riverlands. The realm demands judgment for these crimes. You will be taken into custody and tried. If found guilty, you will face the sentences mandated by law. Do you understand?" Tywin's jaw tightened. He answered in a measured tone. "We understand." A fair trial is all we ask. Joffrey let out a scream of defiance. You have no authority to try me. I am the king. But his words sounded pitiful, empty, drowned out by the crowd's murmurs. The guards dragged him back. Robb nodded to his men. See them confined. If any harm befalls them before the trial, those responsible will answer to me. He would not see them turned into martyrs or used as an excuse for more violence. The Great John opened his mouth as though to protest, but a single glare from Robb silenced him. The times of reckless vengeance had passed. This was a moment to prove he was different from those who had spilled Stark blood without remorse. With the Lannisters removed under heavy guard, the tension in the throne room shifted. Men began cheering in earnest, chanting "Stark, Stark, King in the North." Others took up the cry of "The Rose and the Wolf, the Rose and the Wolf." Margaery felt a rush of emotion. They had done it. They had taken King's Landing without setting it ablaze, freed Sansa and Arya, and brought the Lannister reign to an end. Yet the realm was far from stable. War had devastated the north, the Riverlands, and parts of the Reach. Walder Frey still lurked like a venomous serpent. Even here in the capital, many households might remain loyal to House Lannister or to the memory of the Baratheons. Robb lifted a hand for silence. Gradually, the chants subsided. "We will see to the city's immediate needs," he declared. "Food, shelter, and safety. Let it be known that we came not to punish the innocent but to bring an end to chaos. Henceforth, the laws of the North and the justice of House Stark shall guide us here until the realm decides its future." It was a carefully phrased statement, not a declaration that he would sit the Iron Throne. He had pledged himself king in the North, but now that he occupied King's Landing, many would expect him to claim the entire realm. Some might argue that if Stannis had a right, or if Renly had once had a claim, or if the Targaryens might return. The War of the Five Kings had blurred every line of succession. Margaery wondered how Robb would navigate these treacherous waters. In the days that followed the city's fall, a strange calm settled over King's Landing. Men patrolled the streets in pairs or small squads, wearing either the direwolf sigil or the Tyrell rose. The battered gold cloaks who hadn't fled swore new oaths of loyalty, if only to avoid a traitor's death. A few pockets of chaos had to be quelled: looters, vengeful smallfolk who tried to lynch wealthy Lannister supporters. But overall, the promise of bread from the Red Keep soothed many tensions. Margaery took a leading role in organizing distribution, aided by Sansa Stark, who found a sense of purpose in helping other women and children. Arya, restless and still angry, roamed the castle's halls, defiant of protocol. But she clung to her brother whenever he was near, as though fearful he might vanish again. Cersei, Tywin, and Joffrey languished under watchful guard in a secure tower suite, each day visited by maesters who confirmed they were fed but not free to plot or escape. Peter Baelish was nowhere to be found. He had vanished from the city shortly before the siege. Varys, the master of whisperers, emerged from the shadows within a day of the city's fall, pledging loyalty to the Wolf King. Robb took his words with caution, knowing how slippery the eunuch's loyalties could be. Amid these swirlings of power, Robb and Margaery found themselves at a crossroads. In council sessions held in the solar of the Red Keep, they debated the fate of the Iron Throne. The Great John advocated that Robb claim it and rule as the undisputed king of the Seven Kingdoms. Edmure Tully echoed this sentiment, though he worried the Southern Lords might rebel again. Roose Bolton offered no outright opinion, merely stating that the North must remain in strength. But Robb had spent countless hours thinking of the North's independence. That was why he had been crowned king in the first place, to free the North from Southern entanglements. If he took the Iron Throne, would the North truly be free, or would he be shackling it to the fate of the entire realm? On the other hand, if he refused the throne, who would claim it? Stannis Baratheon was still out there, presumably at Dragonstone or perhaps in the Stormlands, waiting for his moment. Would that spark another war? Margaery, privy to all these discussions, offered counsel in her calm manner. "We cannot simply declare the city free and depart," she told Robb one evening. They stood on a balcony overlooking the Blackwater, the sky tinted deep purple by twilight. If you leave a power vacuum, the realm will tear itself apart yet again. At the very least, you must install a regent or a new council. The people need stability." He nodded wearily. "I never wanted the Iron Throne. But I see your point. Perhaps we form a great council of lords, let them decide who sits it. The Tullys, the Arryns, the Tyrells, the Martells all must have a say. Though I doubt Walder Frey will be invited." His voice held a trace of bitter humor. He turned to face her. "And you? Do you wish to be queen of all 7 kingdoms?" She answered with gentle sincerity. "I wish to protect my people, the Reach, from Lannister tyranny. To see an end to this devastating war. If the realm desires your leadership, I will stand beside you, but I won't demand it. I pledged myself to you, for better or worse." A faint smile crossed her lips. "But if you choose not to take the throne, we must ensure the realm won't slip back into chaos." He slid an arm around her shoulders, eyes distant. "We'll call a council of the great lords. Let them decide. If they choose me, so be it. If they choose another, I'll at least ensure the North's right to self-govern. But first, we must handle Walder Frey." And so, with that clarity of purpose, Robb summoned ravens to every corner of the realm, to Dorne, to the Vale, to the Stormlands, to the Iron Islands. He invited the great houses to a gathering at King's Landing under a promise of safe passage to decide the future of the Iron Throne. Some, like House Martell, might be slow to respond, still nursing old wounds from the days of Robert's rebellion. But the war-weary land craved an end to the bloodshed. The presence of a northern army occupying King's Landing lent weight to the summons. Meanwhile, Walder Frey's outriders continued their harassment in the Riverlands, though less brazenly now that King's Landing had fallen. Letters arrived at the Red Keep, penned by Walder's shaky hand, railing against Robb's broken oath. Each letter brimmed with insults and demands, that Robb hand over certain Tully-held lands, that Edmure marry another Frey daughter, that the king in the north come to the twins and beg forgiveness. Robb tossed these letters aside with disgust, but the threat remained. A large portion of the northern forces was still stationed in and around the Riverlands to safeguard supply lines. Walder Frey could launch a punitive raid at any moment. Or worse, he could attempt to isolate King's Landing from the north by seizing key crossings. Robb and Margaery debated sending an army to besiege the twins, but that would require diverting strength from the newly seized capital. Ultimately, they resolved to handle the Frey threat through a different tactic. Let them stand alone, isolated, while a new order took shape. If Walder Frey refused to yield, Robb would give the word for an assault, perhaps joined by the Tully forces who had reason enough to hate the Freys. The final blow could be swift if enough river lords turned on the twins. In these precarious weeks, as King's Landing tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, Margaery Tyrell proved herself more than a match for the city's intricate politics. She presided over daily gatherings in the throne room, hearing the petitions of small folk who needed food, relief, or justice. She worked with Sansa to set up shelters for the displaced, employing funds from Tyrell coffers to purchase grain. The boldness of her generosity drew admiration and also the grumbling of certain northern lords who disliked seeing a southern queen figure in such prominence. But Margaery and Robb stayed united. They knew the realm needed a symbol of healing, of unity, after so much war. At the same time, war tribunals began behind closed doors. Ser Island Payne, the silent headsman who had executed Eddard Stark, was found cowering in a lower dungeon of the Red Keep, apparently hidden there by Cersei. He was dragged out and made to answer for his crimes. Other Lannister men, known for atrocities in the Riverlands, were hunted down. Some were executed, others imprisoned. Robb refused to let the city dissolve into widespread vengeance. Only the guilty were punished, each case handled by a panel of Northern and Tyrell judges. It was not the swift, merciless purge that some had anticipated, but a measured approach that aimed to show the realm that Robb Stark was not a butcher, but a king governed by law. Each night, he and Margaery returned to the royal apartments they had claimed, often too exhausted for more than a few murmured words before collapsing onto the bed. Yet there were tender moments too, a quiet dinner where they sipped wine on a balcony overlooking the city's flickering lights, or a dawn walk in Maegor's holdfast courtyard, arms entwined, speaking softly about the future. The closeness forged in war had blossomed into genuine affection. They were no longer awkward strangers bound by political need. They had stood side by side through mortal danger. Now, in the hush after the storm, they found solace in each other's presence. Slowly, replies to Robb's summons began to arrive. Dorne sent a carefully worded letter expressing willingness to attend a great council if guaranteed safe passage and if their historical grievances were acknowledged. The Vale, under Lysa Arryn's regency, seemed reluctant. She barely responded, citing concerns for Little Lord Robert's health. From the Iron Islands came only defiance. Balon Greyjoy, calling himself King of the Isles, had no intention of bowing to a northern usurper. That was an old, festering conflict that might need separate resolution. The most intriguing reply came from Dragonstone. Stannis Baratheon, the self-declared rightful heir to Robert, wrote that he would come in person to King's Landing for this great council on condition that Joffrey and Cersei stand trial for regicide and incest. Robb smirked at that. Stannis would come, but with demands. It was better than a declaration of renewed war. Indeed, the realm's exhaustion might finally be pushing all sides toward negotiation. Margaery recalled her one-time betrothal to Stannis's brother Renly. In a different world, she would have been queen beside Renly, but that man was gone and fate had woven a different tapestry. As the date for the Great Council approached, the city's mood shifted again. Merchants reopened shops guarded by northern soldiers. Ships began docking at the Blackwater Bay piers, though carefully searched by the Allied navy that had sailed up from the Reach. With the blockade eased, supplies flooded in. Bread became available, fruit and salted fish reappeared on market stalls. The small folks' resentment of the new regime softened under full bellies. Children pointed at the direwolf banners with curiosity rather than fear. Nonetheless, tension bubbled beneath the surface. Some whispered that Stannis would never let the North remain a separate kingdom. Others feared that House Martell might side with Aegon Targaryen if rumors of a Targaryen claimant across the narrow sea proved true. And many in the city asked, would Robb Stark try to keep the throne for himself, or would he simply retreat north once he had punished the Lannisters? Amid these swirling questions, Margaery and Robb remained a united front, determined to see the council through. The day came at last when Stannis Baratheon arrived. He sailed his small fleet up the Blackwater, docking at King's Landing under the watch of allied archers on the city walls. The Northmen, the Tyrell Knights, and the small folk all crowded to see the spectacle, Stannis stepping onto the quay in his dour, stern manner, accompanied by a red-robed priestess, Melisandre of Ascai. Many whispered that she commanded dark powers. Beside Stannis strode Ser Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight, looking weathered by the sea. The banners of the Fiery Heart mingled with the crowned stag, though that symbol seemed overshadowed by Stannis's personal sigils. A detachment of northern cavalry escorted Stannis and his retinue to the Red Keep. In the throne room, he came face to face with Robb Stark and Margaery Tyrell, who stood upon the dais. Sansa and Arya were present, along with Catelyn, Edmure, the Great Jon, Roose Bolton, and other lords who had chosen to remain in the city. Stannis bowed stiffly, though whether it was a bow to the occupant of King's Landing or simply a courtesy was unclear. Robb returned a nod, measuring the older man's stern face. I thank you for coming, Lord Stannis, Robb said, using the courtesy title rather than addressing him as king. Stannis's lips tightened, but he said nothing in protest. He let his intense, cold gaze sweep the hall. I come for justice, Stannis said bluntly, and to settle the matter of succession. The boy Joffrey is no true king. But neither, I suspect, do you intend to sit the Iron Throne. He cast a sidelong glance at the monstrous seat behind Robb. So which is it, Stark? Is this your seat, or do we still contest it? Margaery felt the hush around them. So did Robb. After a measured breath, Robb replied clearly, I have no desire for the Iron Throne. I have come to free the North and ensure peace. Whether you claim the throne or a new council chooses another is for the realm to decide, so long as the North's liberty is respected and the crimes against my house are atoned for. Stannis' jaw clenched. You speak of the North's liberty. Yet the Seven Kingdoms have long remained one under the throne Robert seized from the Targaryens. I am Robert's heir by all the laws of gods and men. If the lords confirm me, I would see the North remain under the crown as it has been for centuries. Murmurs ran through the hall. The Great Jon muttered a curse, hand twitching near his sword. Margaery felt the air crackle. This was the test, whether Robb's hopes for the North's independence would clash irrevocably with Stannis' iron sense of duty. Then she remembered the words Robb had shared with her, that he would allow the lords of Westeros to decide if they wanted a single king or multiple realms. One step at a time, with the priority on stopping bloodshed. We will debate these matters in the council, Robb said, his voice level. For now, you are welcome in this city. The Lannisters stand trial soon. If your cause is justice, you may witness it. Stannis inclined his head, though his expression revealed little gratitude. Melisandre observed from behind him, her red robes glimmering in the torchlight, eyes roving over Margaery with a strange, assessing look. Margaery felt an unsettling chill. That night, a great hall was prepared for the opening of the council. Lords from the Riverlands, the Crownlands, and the Stormlands gathered, joined by emissaries from the Westerlands. those who had turned their backs on Tywin once it was clear he had lost. A few minor Vale lords also arrived, though Lisa Arryn herself remained in the Eyrie. Dorne's representative, a distant cousin of the Martells, arrived with a small retinue proclaiming neutrality until they heard the proposals. The tension in the hall was palpable, a swirl of heraldry, uneasy alliances, and old grudges. Robb Stark presided as host, though not as undisputed king. Margaery stood beside him, ensuring that the Tyrell presence was felt. On one side, Stannis Baratheon and his Red Priestess took seats of honor, stiff and watchful. On the other, Edmure Tully, the Great John, and Roose Bolton represented the North and Riverlands. Lords Rose, Rowan, Tarly, and a scattering of other Tyrell banner men flanked Margaery. The trial of the Lannisters was set to begin in the morrow, but the immediate question was how to shape the realm's governance going forward. For hours, they debated with careful civility. Stannis insisted on his rightful claim. Roose Bolton responded that the North would never bend the knee again after the blood spilled. Dorne's representative demanded recognition of their autonomy, or at least major concessions, referencing their age-old refusal to be subdued. The Crownland lords worried that dividing the realm into multiple kingdoms would lead to perpetual border wars. Another contingent argued that perhaps a Targaryen heir might exist, a notion that Stannis dismissed as nonsense. Through it all, Margaery stepped in at delicate moments, offering points of compromise, reminding the lords that continued war would only deepen the realm's misery. Robb listened more than he spoke, occasionally stating that the North's priority was to remain free. The possibility emerged of forging a new structure, a confederation, perhaps, of separate kingdoms bound by mutual defense treaties. It was an unprecedented concept, but so was the entire situation. By the time the council session ended for the night, no consensus was reached, yet no swords had been drawn. That in itself felt like a victory. Margaery could see exhaustion on everyone's faces. Winter's chill seemed to seep through the windows, though the hearth fires blazed. The realm was tired of war, but bridging centuries of tradition in a single council was no easy feat. Meanwhile, the trial of Cersei, Tywin, and Joffrey loomed. The next morning, in the same grand hall, the three Lannisters were brought forth under guard. A hush settled over the assembled lords and small folk who were permitted to witness. Robb had appointed a tribunal of 5 judges, himself, Edmure Tully, Stannis Baratheon, Doran Martell's representative as a neutral party, and Brynden Blackfish Tully, who had arrived recently to join his nephew. This was an attempt at impartiality, though the North held a strong voice. One by one, witnesses recounted the crimes. The beheading of Ned Stark, the torment of Sansa, the sack of the Riverlands, the betrayal of the Baratheon line. Tywin's role in ordering atrocities was detailed, including the burning of villages. Cersei's manipulations were laid bare. Joffrey's cruelty spoke for itself, though the boy insisted he was the rightful king, above all law. Tywin, ever pragmatic, mounted a defense based on his duty to protect his house, claiming he had only acted in the interest of stability. Cersei sneered at the court, hurling insults and accusations of hypocrisy. Joffrey raved that the entire proceeding was illegal. The crowd watched in fascination, whispering and gasping at each revelation. Stannis' face remained carved from stone, but Margaery saw flickers of anger in his eyes when the incest was discussed, confirming Joffrey's illegitimacy. The Dorne representative frowned at talk of Lannister crimes, no doubt remembering how Elia Martell and her children had perished years ago. Robb held his composure, though his hands balled into fists whenever he recalled the day Ned Stark was executed. In the end, the tribunal reached a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. Joffrey was stripped of any royal title, declared a bastard born of incest, and sentenced to death. Cersei, too, was sentenced for high treason and conspiracy to murder the hand of the king. Tywin's fate, however, was more complicated. Some argued he should die as well, but Stannis insisted that Tywin's strategic mind might be of use if he yielded any claim to power. The discussion grew heated. Margaery saw that Robb wrestled with the moral cost of another beheading, especially one that might provoke further unrest in the Westerlands. In the final pronouncement, the tribunal decided Tywin's punishment would be imprisonment and the forfeiture of House Lannister's wealth to rebuild the realm. He would remain under guard until the Great Council decided the broader structure of the realm. Should they choose to restore a single monarchy, Tywin might face additional penalties or, at Stannis' urging, be executed. But for now, he was spared immediate death, as a concession to the possibility of using his forced cooperation to stabilize the Westerlands. It was a compromise that satisfied few, but averted immediate bloodshed. That afternoon, Joffrey and Cersei were led to the courtyard for their final sentencing. A hush fell over the assembled onlookers. Joffrey shrieked curses as the headsman dragged him forward, while Cersei stared at the crowd with burning loathing. Robb, flanked by Margaery, stood overseeing the grim ritual. Sansa and Arya watched from a distance, each bearing raw wounds from their captivity. Though Arya's face was grim with vengeance, the headsman raised his sword. With a single stroke, Joffrey's shrill voice was silenced forever. A moment later, the same steel ended Cersei's life. No cheers followed, only a somber murmur, like a gust of wind over a mass grave. The Lannister hold on the throne had ended in blood as many had predicted it would. Afterward, Robb moved among his people, offering quiet words of reassurance. Margaery consoled Sansa, who was torn between relief and horror at seeing the boy she had once been betrothed to so violently dispatched. Arya's hands shook, though she tried to hide it by clenching them into fists. The entire city seemed to exhale as though awakening from a prolonged nightmare. Yet the bigger question remained, would the realm unify under one king, Stannis, or Robb, or some other claimant, or would it break apart into multiple independent kingdoms? The Great Council resumed its sessions. The Martell envoy pressed for southern autonomy. The Vale's lords demanded trade guarantees. The Stormlands aligned with Stannis, urging one unified kingdom. The North, behind Robb, insisted on independence or, failing that, an extraordinary arrangement that granted them near-total self-rule. Days rolled into weeks of negotiation. The streets of King's Landing slowly stabilized under strict but fair rule. Breadlines shortened. Sellswords and mercenaries drifted away, no longer able to profit from chaos. Walder Frey, hearing the outcome of the Lannisters' trial, realized his own position had grown more tenuous. The letters he now sent to King's Landing were filled with half-pleas, half-threats, as though uncertain whether to provoke or flatter. He demanded that Robb meet him at the Twins under safe conduct to discuss amends. Roose Bolton's scouts reported that Walder's men seemed divided. Some recognized that House Frey would face annihilation if the entire realm unified against them. Others thirsted for revenge. Each raven from the north described mounting tension near the Green Fork. A single spark could set off fresh battles. Through it all, Margaery remained at Robb's side, guiding him in the labyrinth of southern politics. She recognized that if Walder Frey was left to fester, he might orchestrate a disaster. Perhaps that was where the newly consolidated realm, whatever shape it took, would have to turn its attention next. But only after the council concluded. In hushed conversations late at night, she and Robb discussed the possibility of traveling north with a large host, forcing the twins to bend the knee or face destruction. If the realm decided on separate kingdoms, that might be a matter solely for the North and Riverlands. If they remained unified, then Walder Frey would be rebelling against the entire realm. Either way, a reckoning approached. On the final day of the council, with autumn's chill turning the leaves in the King's Landing gardens to gold and red, a compromise was struck. After exhaustive debate and careful horse trading, the lords agreed to crown Stannis Baratheon as King of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men on the condition that the North be recognized as an autonomous domain under Robb Stark's leadership. The Riverlands, pledged to House Tully, would remain a part of Stannis' kingdom, though Robb's marriage ties gave them strong alignment with the North. Dorne retained special privileges and local autonomy. The Crownlands, the Westerlands, the Stormlands, and the Reach would remain under the Iron Throne. An arrangement of trade routes and mutual defense pacts would knit these lands together, tenuously but enough to avert immediate war. In effect, it was an alliance of two kings, Stannis in the south, Robb in the north, each acknowledging the other's domain. The rest of the realm placed their oaths behind Stannis with the condition that he govern justly or face removal by a new Great Council. It was a radical departure from the tradition of a single ruler for all 7 kingdoms. Yet the realm had been irreparably shaken, and compromise was necessary to halt the endless bloodshed. Stannis gave his word that he would not wage war against Robb's north so long as Robb did not encroach upon the southern crowns. For the moment, each side recognized they had a common foe in Walder Frey, one who threatened the fragile peace. It was decided that once Stannis took official control in the south, he would lend forces to quell any Frey uprising if Robb so requested. Tywin Lannister, still imprisoned, would be forced to cede influence over the Westerlands to a cousin or more distant branch who swore loyalty to Stannis. The wealth of Casterly Rock would be heavily taxed to help rebuild war-torn regions. In a solemn ceremony held in the Red Keep's courtyard, Stannis was crowned with a new circlet of steel and rubies. He accepted the fealty of the Southern Lords, though the old warmth of Robert's day was nowhere in evidence. Stannis remained cold, determined, but seemingly aware that compromise had saved the realm from further ruin. Robb stood by, wearing no crown but the circlet of bronze and iron that marked him as king in the north. They exchanged a formal clasp of forearms, each acknowledging the other's domain. For the Watchers who had grown up in a realm that always had one king, it was a moment both unsettling and hopeful to Mona. Arcee dividing Westeros to prevent it from tearing itself apart completely. With the new order established, Robb and Margaery turned their minds to the journey north. A portion of their forces would remain in the Riverlands, ensuring a stable boundary with Stannis' realm. The rest, including many northern bannermen who yearned to see their homes again, prepared to depart King's Landing in a grand procession. Sansa chose to remain in the capital for a time, aiding Margaery in philanthropic endeavors, but Arya insisted on returning north with Robb, hunger for home blazing in her eyes. Catelyn, too, was torn, but her place was ultimately with her son in Winterfell or at Riverrun, bridging the ties between the newly recognized Northern Kingdom and the Riverlands. On the morning of their departure, Robb walked the battlements of the Red Keep one last time. Margaery joined him, gazing out at the city that sprawled beneath. A hush lay over the rooftops, broken only by the calls of distant gulls. The tide of war had receded, leaving broken families and battered streets, yet also a fragile sense that peace might be possible. Robb turned to her. "We came here in force, not knowing if we'd ever leave alive," he said, voice soft. "Now we return north with the city's gates open behind us, having ended Lannister rule." She looked at him with affection and respect. "You did what many thought impossible. You protected the North, freed your sisters, and changed the shape of the realm. History will remember you, Robb Stark." He reached out, taking her hand, lacing her fingers with his. "We did it together. The wolf and the rose." She smiled, recalling how many had whispered that phrase around the campfires. "I only hope we can keep peace long enough for the land to heal. Walder Frey will test us. Others might too," she admitted. "But we've learned how to unite houses, how to negotiate alliances. We're not alone anymore." Her gaze fell on the bustling yard below, where Knights of the Reach mingled with northern bannermen, each one preparing for the march. The sight reminded her of how far they'd come since that day at Riverrun when she first took Robb's hand in marriage. They descended the battlements to oversee the final muster of their troops. Stannis stood by the castle's main gate, watching them depart with his customary stoic demeanor. Lords parted to allow Robb and Margaery through. An honor guard of Northern and Tyrell knights formed a protective ring around them while wagons of supplies trundled behind. The city's small folk gathered to watch the departure, some cheering, some just observing with wary eyes. For them, one war was ending, but the scars remained. At least the breadlines had grown shorter. Edmure Tully rode at the front, guiding a portion of the Riverlands men who would head home. Catelyn and Arya rode beside him, while Sansa lingered near the Red Keep gates, choosing to stay for a while longer under the new southern government. Ser Loras Tyrell led a column of flower-laden banners, bidding farewell to the city where he had once served a short time under Renly. The Great John was already at the vanguard, eager to leave the stinking southern city, as he called it, behind. Roose Bolton had gone ahead days earlier, tasked with securing key roads in the Riverlands to block any Frey retaliation. There would be no repeating the infiltration stunts near the twins, not if Bolton could help it. Robb and Margaery paused at the threshold, turning to glance one final time at the city that had witnessed so much turmoil. Sunlight glinted on the battered red stone of the walls. The wind carried the faint smell of the river, blending with the tang of ashes that still lingered from the fires of war. Then they urged their horses forward, crossing beneath the portcullis onto the King's Road. Behind them, the horns sounded a sonorous farewell. King's Landing fell away, its spires receding into the distance as the long caravan began its journey north. They traveled at a steady pace, the weather growing colder with each league. Autumn leaves swirled around them, gold and crimson, forming drifts that crackled under hooves. Margaery pulled her cloak tighter. Though she had grown accustomed to northern airs at Riverrun, the true north would be colder still. Robb seemed undaunted, shoulders set firmly. He carried the scars of war, but also the unwavering resolve to protect his land. As they passed towns and hamlets, the people greeted them with curiosity, some with cautious celebration. News of the two kings had spread rapidly, accompanied by rumors that Joffrey was dead, Tywin imprisoned, and Cersei beheaded. When they reached the Riverlands, the devastation from previous campaigns was apparent. Burned farms, scorched fields, collapsed bridges. Edmure Tully's men branched off to begin reconstruction efforts. Catelyn and Arya parted ways with Robb and Margaery near Riverrun. Catelyn to help Edmure restore Tully rule. Arya determined to visit Winterfell eventually, but drawn first to re-explore the Riverlands where she had once roamed. She assured Robb she would come to Winterfell soon enough. They embraced, exchanging promises of future reunions. Margaery sensed the complicated swirl of relief and sorrow within the family. Though justice had been served to the Lannisters, Ned Stark was still gone, and the world had changed irreversibly. Finally, the northern host pressed on toward the Neck. Walder Frey's outriders watched from afar, but did not engage. Word was that the old man had barricaded himself within the twins, uncertain whether to beg for peace or keep preparing for war. Scattered skirmishes did break out. At one crossing, a Frey party attacked a small column of northern supply wagons, only to be routed by Bolton men. But no large-scale confrontation occurred, as if the Freys were testing the water, waiting to see if the North's new status would bring the full wrath of two kingdoms upon them. Night after night, Robb and Margaery conferred by the campfire, discussing the best way to handle Walder Frey. They could try to starve him out with a siege, or they could attempt a diplomatic approach. The bitterness ran deep, but a cornered foe might lash out dangerously if not given an avenue for surrender. Margaery proposed giving Walder one final chance to bend the knee to the king in the north, repay reparations for the caravans he had burned, and accept a new Tully-Frey marriage arrangement if Edmure approved. Robb grimaced at the thought of Edmure's reaction. Yet if a union could end the bloodshed, it might be worth it. If Walder refused, then the twins would face the combined might of the north and possibly Stannis from the south if the new southern king chose to uphold the pact. That should be enough pressure to crush Walder once and for all. As they neared Moat Cailin, the ancient fortress that guarded the threshold of the north, Margaery felt the air shift. The wind carried a raw chill, tasting of pine and distant snow. She saw a new energy in Robb's features. He was home. The north stretched before them, vast and stark. Even though she had traveled here in the earlier stages of the war, this time felt different. She was now queen to the king in the north, recognized by half the realm and respected, if begrudgingly, by the other half. The old fortress of Moat Cailin rose from a landscape of bogs and shallow waters, its towers half-ruined but still imposing. A small garrison of northern soldiers hailed them, eyes lighting up at the sight of their king returned victorious. Word spread quickly, and the horns sounded. From the ruined ramparts, ragged cheers echoed. The outriders who had traveled ahead to Winterfell carried news that the city was secure, though still recovering from the ravages left by Theon Greyjoy's short-lived occupation, for, in this timeline, some version of the Ironborn intrusion might have happened before Robb reached an accord, or it might not have. Either way, Winterfell would show signs of war or the need for repairs. Beyond Moat Cailin, the road turned bleak but resolute, winding through forests that had begun shedding their leaves in earnest. Snow flurries danced on the wind. Margaery often rode with a fur-lined cloak, her cheeks stinging pink from the cold. Yet there was beauty in the north, towering pines, silver rivers, crisp air that smelled of fresh frost. She saw the quiet pride in the northern soldiers, the way they looked to Robb as the living embodiment of their identity, a king who had bested the Lannisters and reclaimed the North's freedom. When at last they beheld the sight of Winterfell rising from the wintry plains, Margaery felt a lump in her throat. Smoke curled gently from the chimneys, and the old grey walls stood firm despite the hardships they had endured. A crowd gathered outside the gates, townsfolk and bannermen, all waiting to welcome the return of their king. Banners flew in the cold wind, the dire wolf of House Stark snapping proudly against the pale sky. At Robb's side, Margaery inhaled sharply, sensing the significance of this moment. Coming full circle, from Riverrun to King's Landing and back to the very heart of House Stark's ancestral home. The gates opened, and a roar of welcome greeted them. Robb dismounted, cloak swirling around him, and helped Margaery from her horse. The household guard bowed, beaming. The older servants wept openly at the sight of Ned Stark's son returned with a queen at his side. Margaery offered them gentle smiles, acknowledging their loyalty. And in that courtyard, thick with the smell of hearth fires and cooking stew, the king in the north finally returned to the seat of his forebears. That evening, Winterfell's great hall blazed with torchlight. A feast of sorts was hastily assembled, salted meats, thick stews, and spiced mulled wine. The North was never lavish in its fare, but what they offered, they did so generously. Laughter mingled with tears as clansmen and bannermen recounted stories of the war, praising their king. Outside, the wind howled, and snow began to fall in earnest, draping Winterfell's walls in a soft hush. Margaery found herself seated at the high table, wrapped in furs, next to Robb. She looked out over the gathered faces, men and women who had endured years of war, heartbreak, hunger. Yet they laughed now, feeling safe. She caught snippets of conversation about repairs needed to the outer walls, about forging new alliances with mountain clans, about the next steps for building peace with Stannis' southern realm. She heard talk of Walder Frey as well, but for tonight, that threat felt distant, overshadowed by the warmth of the welcome home. Robb leaned toward her, speaking softly so only she could hear. "I never thought I'd see this hall so full of joy again, not after everything that's happened." She squeezed his hand under the table. "You brought them hope. They see in you the strength of House Stark. In time, the wounds will heal." He paused, eyes drifting to the dais where the banners of House Stark hung. "You've been my strength, Margaery. Without our alliance, I'd have been outnumbered and starved by the Lannisters. We owe our victory to you and your house. The North will not forget." She felt a blush warm her cheeks, though the chill air still nipped. "Nor will the Reach forget that you saved us from being tied to Joffrey's tyranny. We stand together. Always." Their gazes locked for a moment, the bond they had forged shining in that wordless exchange. Then the revelers lifted cups, calling for a toast to the king and queen in the North, and they turned to accept the salute. Outside the castle, the snowfall thickened, blanketing the roads in white silence. Winter was here, but in Winterfell's hall, the fires burned bright. For the first time in a long while, the North felt alive with possibility rather than fear. In the days ahead, they would address Walder Frey's menace. They would stabilize their new boundary with the southern kingdom under Stannis. They would rebuild battered keeps, replant fields, and nurse the realm back to health. Yet tonight, they allowed themselves a measure of celebration. Long into the night, the hall echoed with songs of the old kings, of the direwolf lords who had ruled the North for thousands of years. Margaery listened, entranced by the haunting melodies. Northern voices wove sagas of ice and wind, of heroes who braved the long night. She felt a stirring in her heart, a sense that she, too, was part of this tapestry now. The seeds of a new era lay before them, an era shaped not by the old vow that Robb had broken at the Twins, nor by the forging of a mere marriage alliance, but by the will to unite two great houses in mutual respect. And so the queen in the North sat among her husband's people, contentment glowing in her eyes. Robb Stark raised his cup, meeting her gaze across the table. In that moment, no specter of war, no shadow of Frey betrayal, no southern intrigue could pierce the fortress of warmth they had built in the midst of a snowy night. The wolf and the rose had weathered every trial the realm could throw at them. Together, they would stand against whatever came next, a testament to the choice they had made on that distant day at Riverrun, forever altering the fate of Westeros.